Just 4 days earlier, on November 12, 2012, the seemingly peaceful life of the Knofel family was shattered forever. Nestled in the quiet suburb of Willoughby Hills, a charming town just outside Cleveland, Ohio, the Knofels enjoyed what appeared to be a comfortable and stable existence. Kevin Knofel worked diligently as a truck driver, while Lisa Knofel devoted her career to helping others as a social worker with the Cuyahoga County Department of Children and Family Services. But on that fateful day, their world was irrevocably altered, leaving behind a trail of heartbreak and unanswered questions. Their home was unassuming and tranquil, a charming three-bedroom nestled near the serene Chagrin River. The large front yard, complete with a trampoline and a wooden playset with a slide, was a playground for the children, reflecting the love and care they received. It was a place where laughter and joy filled the air, and there was no reason to believe that anything could disrupt their peace. On the evening of November 12th, Kevin was away, driving his truck for work, while Lisa remained at home, caring for the children. It was an ordinary night, one that should have been safe and uneventful, yet the darkness would soon descend upon the Knofel family in ways no one could have imagined. The Knofel children each had their own unique place in the family. 3-year-old Haley, the child of Kevin and Lisa, was a lively and cherished little girl. 13-year-old Megan, Lisa's daughter from her first marriage, had her own routine and space. Finally, there was 18-year-old Sabrina, the family's foster daughter, who had recently turned 18 and was navigating the newfound freedoms of adulthood. As the evening of November 12th unfolded, Lisa followed her usual routine, tucking Haley into bed around 10 p.m. It was a familiar scene. Haley would often return to Lisa and Kevin's room a few hours later, seeking the comfort of sleeping in their bed. Megan, the teenager, retreated to her own room around the same time. Meanwhile, Sabrina, with the independence of an adult, stayed up late in the office area, diligently working on a project for her British literature class. The night seemed ordinary, but beneath the surface a storm was brewing that would soon turn their world upside down. Sabrina, absorbed in her music, was lost in her own world, unaware of the quiet movements within the house. She remained focused on her school project until around midnight, when she finally decided to head upstairs and attempt to sleep. However, a persistent headache kept her awake, leaving her restless and unable to find the peace she needed to drift off. Little did she know that this seemingly trivial discomfort would keep her awake during a night that would soon take a tragic turn. Unable to shake her headache, Sabrina left her room and quietly made her way downstairs to Kevin and Lisa's bedroom. What she would encounter next would forever change the course of their lives. Megan and Haley were sound asleep, peacefully nestled in their beds. Lisa, too, was in her room, resting from the day. Sabrina, standing quietly in the dim light, was taking medication. What transpired next remains a mystery, locked away in the shadows of that night. At around 1:15 a.m., 13-year-old Megan was jolted awake by the unmistakable sounds of a struggle. Heart pounding, she rushed into her mother's room, only to be met with a horrifying scene: her foster sister, her mother, and a knife. The nightmare had begun, and nothing would ever be the same again. Lisa Knofel had suffered an unimaginable fate, stabbed 178 times in her head, neck, torso, and extremities. The sheer brutality of the attack was evident in the numerous defensive wounds on her body, a testament to her desperate fight for survival. Some of her injuries were especially gruesome, with deep, complex wounds where the knife had been twisted with vicious intent. One such wound on her jaw was so severe that it severed her carotid artery. The weapon, a 15-inch convex serrated knife, had even bent under the force of the relentless attack. By the time help could have arrived, it was too late. Lisa was beyond saving. Her veins had collapsed from the massive blood loss, and her heart had flatlined. In the midst of this horrifying scene, 3-year-old Haley hid in a closet, terrified and helpless. Meanwhile, Sabrina stood covered in blood, her mother's blood holding the knife that had ended Lisa's life. At 1:17 a.m., a local police patrolman received a dispatch call about an assault in progress in the typically quiet neighborhood of Willoughby Hills. Responding swiftly, he raced to the scene, pulling into the driveway to a sight that would haunt him. 13-year-old Megan, clutching the phone she had used to call 911, stood outside, desperate and terrified, begging him to stop the horror unfolding inside the house. The officer moved quickly down the hallway towards Lisa and Kevin's bedroom, his heart pounding with the urgency of the moment. He called out for Sabrina to come out with her hands up. When she emerged, the gravity of the situation became painfully clear. She was drenched in blood, her face streaked with tears, and in her trembling hand, she still clutched the murder weapon. Sobbing uncontrollably, Sabrina was a haunting image of a nightmarish act that had just taken place. Sabrina bore several small lacerations on her hands, the back of her neck, and on her legs above the knees, wounds that told a chilling story. When the police tried to question her, Sabrina was incoherent, her words tangled in confusion and emotion, and she remained uncooperative. Yet the scene spoke for itself. Megan had witnessed the unthinkable, Sabrina attacking their mother, and the blood that covered Sabrina was irrefutable evidence of the brutal crime. But the question that loomed over everyone was why? Why would this seemingly ordinary member of a loving family resort to such horrific violence? Why would she turn on the woman who had cared for her, stabbing her nearly 200 times in a frenzied fit of rage? The answers seemed impossible to comprehend, leaving a family and a community grappling with the darkness that had descended upon them. Let's delve into the early life of Sabrina Zunick, born in October 1994 into a world marked by instability and turmoil. From the very beginning, Sabrina faced significant challenges, rooted in her troubled family background. Her parents, 35-year-old Mark Zunick and 40-year-old Susan Edwards, both from Ohio, had extensive criminal histories that cast long shadows over Sabrina's childhood. Susan Edwards had already encountered the criminal justice system before Sabrina's birth. In 1984, she was sentenced to 6 months in prison after pleading guilty to grand theft. 6 years later, Susan was embroiled in another serious offense, supplying drugs to a group of 14 and 15-year-olds in Cleveland. Although her sentencing was delayed due to her pregnancy with Sabrina's older half-sibling, she eventually faced additional charges, including obstruction of justice. Sabrina's father, Mark Zunick, was no stranger to the law either. His criminal record included multiple arrests for disorderly conduct and driving under the influence, and his offenses were not limited to nonviolent crimes. By the time Sabrina was born, both of her parents had established a pattern of criminal behavior, creating a chaotic and unstable environment for her from the outset. When Sabrina was just 16 months old, her father, Mark Zunick, was arrested for domestic violence, a troubling event that would be the first of many acts of aggression in Sabrina's early years. Despite the growing instability, Sabrina continued to live with her father and grandmother in a small house in Wickliffe, Ohio, separated from her mother, though Susan and Mark remained in a tumultuous relationship. According to a neighbor, the police were frequently called to their home, often finding Mark in a state of intoxication. Mark's behavior was erratic and dangerous, even towards his young daughter. Shockingly, when Sabrina was a baby, Mark would put vodka in her bottle to make her sleep more easily, a reckless and harmful act that underscored the dysfunction in the household. By 2006, when Sabrina was 11 years old, the situation escalated further. After giving Susan money to buy alcohol, Mark accused her of stealing it for herself. In a violent outburst, he grabbed her by the hair, and when the police arrived, they found Mark ranting that she should leave his house and never return. The police report from that night described Mark as a paranoid schizophrenic who had not been taking his medication, a diagnosis that only added to the chaos of his life. Mark's downward spiral continued with a series of arrests, including charges for drunk driving and property damage. His life, marred by mental illness and substance abuse, ultimately ended in 2012 when he died of an apparent drug overdose. For Sabrina, this tragic and unstable upbringing would leave deep scars, shaping the course of her troubled life. By this time, however, Sabrina had already been removed from her father's chaotic household. As Mark descended further into alcoholism, Sabrina's grandmother found herself unable to manage the responsibility of caring for Sabrina alone. At the age of 14, Sabrina was sent to the county-run group home, Emeke Receiving Home, a facility designed for structured behavior modification. As a teenager, Sabrina's anger issues were well documented. She frequently got into fights at school, and her reputation as someone not to be trifled with grew quickly. Those who knew her during this time described her as someone fiercely protective of herself and wary of letting anyone get too close. One person remarked that she wasn't someone to mess with, nor should anyone try to harm those she loved, because Sabrina would make them, or anyone else who crossed her, pay dearly. These years at the group home, marked by her volatile behavior and deep-seated anger, would foreshadow the tragic events that would later unfold in her life. At the age of 4, Sabrina was diagnosed with ADHD, a condition that, along with other underlying issues, contributed to many of her struggles. Her life was marked by anger issues, compulsive lying, substance abuse, hearing voices and stealing, behaviors that stem from a turbulent upbringing. However, when she transferred to a new high school and moved from the group home to a foster family, a significant change occurred. In her new environment, Sabrina's behavior took a dramatic turn for the better. At her new school, she kept her head down, focused on her studies, and maintained perfect attendance. For the first time in a long while, things seemed to be looking up for the troubled teenager. At 16, Sabrina was finding a sense of stability and normalcy in her life, and much of that was thanks to her new foster family, the Nofels. Little did anyone know that this newfound calm was fragile, and the underlying turmoil within Sabrina was far from resolved. Lisa Knofel was no stranger to dealing with troubled children. Her work as a social worker specialized in child protection, where she encountered the most vulnerable and at-risk youth. She understood the profound impact that compassion could have on a child's life, and made it her mission to extend that same compassion to Sabrina. Lisa welcomed Sabrina into her home, offering her the care and understanding she so desperately needed, hoping to provide a stable and nurturing environment where Sabrina could heal and thrive. Lisa began her work in child protection in 1999, around the same time her daughter Megan was born. At that time, she was married to someone else, but that marriage ended in 2003. In 2006, Lisa met Kevin Knofel, who had also experienced a previous marriage, from 1992 to 1997, though his first child, born in 1993, did not live with him. The details of how Lisa and Kevin met and fell in love remain unclear, but by 2008, they had moved into a charming home on Chagrin Drive. A year later, in 2009, they welcomed their daughter Haley into the world. Together, the Knofel family appeared to be a close-knit and loving unit. Kevin, Lisa, Megan, Haley, and their foster daughter Sabrina seemed to form a cohesive family, radiating warmth and stability, at least from the outside. However, beneath this seemingly perfect exterior, there were cracks that no one could see, foreshadowing the tragedy that would later tear them apart. Despite Sabrina's noticeable improvement in behavior, the harmony in the Knofel household was only superficial. The relationship between Lisa and Sabrina deteriorated rapidly, unraveling almost as quickly as it had begun. Sabrina confided in a friend that Lisa made her life a living hell, and the two frequently clashed in heated and vicious arguments. Sabrina harbored a deep resentment, convinced that Lisa favored her two biological daughters, Megan and Haley, over her. This perceived favoritism fueled Sabrina's sense of injustice and alienation, creating a sharp division within the family. The household became divided, with Lisa, Megan, and Haley on one side, and Sabrina and Kevin on the other. This growing rift only intensified the underlying tensions, setting the stage for the tragic events that would soon follow. What was once a seemingly united family was now fractured, with loyalties split and relationships strained to the breaking point. When Sabrina's relationship with Lisa soured, she turned to Kevin for comfort and support. Kevin, in turn, made sure to be there for her, offering a listening ear and a shoulder to cry on. However, what began as a seemingly supportive bond soon took on a darker and more disturbing nature. Sabrina's friends began to notice the strange dynamic between them, uneasy with the way Kevin and Sabrina interacted. Their relationship was marked by an unsettling level of physical closeness and sexual innuendos that left those around them feeling uncomfortable. Despite the odd behavior, no one raised any alarms. The truth was too horrifying to consider, that Kevin had actually been grooming Sabrina into an inappropriate and manipulative relationship. What appeared on the surface to be a fatherly concern was, in reality, something far more sinister. Kevin's actions blurred the boundaries between caregiver and predator, leading to a deeply troubling and destructive bond that would have devastating consequences for the entire family. Sabrina believed that what she and Kevin shared was love, a deep and genuine connection that made her feel valued and understood. However, Kevin made it clear that their relationship had to remain a closely guarded secret from the rest of the family. The need for secrecy only intensified the illicit nature of their bond, drawing Sabrina further into a web of manipulation and deception. What Sabrina perceived as love was, in truth, a carefully orchestrated manipulation, with Kevin controlling the narrative and ensuring that their twisted relationship stayed hidden from everyone else. Whenever Lisa, Megan, and Haley were out of the house, Kevin and Sabrina seized the opportunity to spend time together, further solidifying their secret relationship. Sabrina even went so far as to save Kevin's contact in her iPod under the name Kevin Love, a telling sign of how deeply she was entangled in the illusion of their connection. As their relationship grew closer throughout 2012, the tension between Sabrina and Lisa escalated dramatically. Sabrina, feeling a strong maternal instinct toward 3-year-old Haley, became increasingly resentful of the way Lisa kept her and Haley apart. This resentment fueled Sabrina's anger and frustration, deepening the rift between her and Lisa. The household, once a semblance of family unity, became a battleground of divided loyalties and simmering conflict, with Sabrina caught in the middle, torn between her attachment to Kevin and her growing animosity toward Lisa. On one occasion, the tension between Lisa and Sabrina boiled over, leading Lisa to physically restrain Sabrina. Distressed by the incident, Sabrina reported it to the police, but the matter was ultimately dismissed and no action was taken. Despite the increasingly troubled atmosphere within the Neufel home, Sabrina's request to stay with the family after her 18th birthday in October 2012 was granted. Her social worker, unaware of the turmoil beneath the surface, saw no red flags. On the outside, everything appeared to be in order. Sabrina was doing well in school, consistently attending her counseling sessions, and passing drug tests with no issues. There was no visible sign of the darkness brewing within the home, no indication of the nightmare that was about to unfold. The facade of normalcy hid the escalating tensions and the secret relationship between Kevin and Sabrina, leaving those who could have intervened unaware of the impending tragedy. In the months leading up to November 12, 2012, the relationship between Kevin and Lisa Neufel began to unravel. On September 15th, the police were called to their home in response to a domestic disturbance. Kevin and Lisa had argued over Megan, with Lisa accusing Kevin of choking their daughter. Kevin denied the accusation, claiming he had only taken Megan by the back of the neck to guide her into her room. Although the altercation had ended and Lisa had left the house, Kevin preemptively spoke to the police, concerned that the incident might be used against him in potential divorce proceedings. Kevin had confided in Sabrina that he wanted to divorce Lisa so they could be together openly. He even went so far as to consult Sabrina's social worker, asking what would happen if he and Lisa divorced and whether he would be able to retain custody of Sabrina. His intentions were clear, though deeply troubling. On a family camping trip with his old friend, David Strunk, in October 2012, Kevin confessed that Lisa suspected he was having an affair with their foster daughter, Sabrina. Kevin showed David photos of Sabrina, including some modeling shots he had helped her create, and even images of underwear she had bought him. Kevin revealed that he was already seeing a divorce attorney, setting the stage for the events that would soon follow. This revelation came just a month before Lisa's brutal murder, a crime that would expose the dark and twisted reality of the Neufel household. Kevin was out on the road working the night of November 12th when the police contacted him with the devastating news of what had happened at his home. Rattled but determined, he immediately demanded information about his girls and rushed to pick up Haley and Megan from the police department at 5:01 a.m. Sabrina, however, was not with them. She was in police custody. The officers who interacted with Kevin that morning, just hours after his family had been violently torn apart, were struck by his unnervingly calm demeanor. One officer recalled Kevin explaining that he had worked as an EMT before and had seen traumatic scenes like this numerous times. He insisted that there was nothing they could tell him that he hadn't encountered before, and he pressed them for every detail of what had happened. His behavior was peculiar, as he seemed more frustrated by the fact that he wasn't allowed to see Sabrina than by the horrific crime that had occurred. He ranted that, as her foster father, he had the right to see her and demanded to be added to her visitor list, displaying a disturbing focus on Sabrina even in the wake of such a tragedy. Meanwhile, the police were focused on unraveling the mystery of why Sabrina had committed such a brutal act against her foster mother. As they interviewed Sabrina, they were met with a mix of confusion, emotion, and resistance. The officers pressed her for details, trying to piece together the events that led to the horrific crime. Sabrina's responses were inconsistent as she struggled to explain her actions. The investigators were faced with the daunting task of understanding what had driven this young woman, who had seemingly found stability in the Knofel home, to commit murder. Was it the result of her troubled past, the toxic relationship with Kevin, or something deeper and more sinister? The answers were not immediately clear, but what was certain was that this was no ordinary crime. It was a tragedy rooted in a complex web of manipulation, betrayal, and deep psychological wounds. The truth, as it began to emerge, would only deepen the sense of shock and disbelief surrounding the case. As the police delved deeper into their interrogation of Sabrina, the conversation took a chilling turn. Sabrina, visibly shaken and struggling to make sense of her own actions, began to reveal the fractured relationship she had with Lisa. In a voice tinged with frustration and resentment, she said, "She's never seemed to like me, and she's been wanting me out of the house." The officers, sensing there was more beneath the surface, pressed further. They asked Sabrina, "What are your thoughts on how Lisa is not alive now? What do you think about the fact that she's no longer here?" Sabrina hesitated, her mind grappling with the enormity of what had happened. The weight of her words hung heavily in the air, the reality of the situation beginning to sink in. What, what are your thoughts on that? That she's not alive?" the officers asked again, trying to break through the wall of confusion and denial. This conversation marked a pivotal moment in the investigation. It became clear that Sabrina was wrestling with a complex mix of emotions, anger, guilt, and perhaps a sense of justification, all tangled together in a dark knot that had led to the unthinkable. The officers knew they were close to uncovering the true motive behind the crime, but the more they pressed, the more they realized just how deeply rooted the issues were, not just between Sabrina and Lisa, but within the entire dynamic of the Knofel household. Sabrina insisted that she had no recollection of her foster mother's death. She claimed that her memory went blank after she entered Lisa's bedroom to take medication. From that moment on, she professed to remember nothing, leaving the officers to confront a young woman seemingly lost in a fog of confusion and denial. The stark contrast between the brutality of the crime and Sabrina's claimed amnesia only deepened the sense of tragedy and disbelief surrounding the case, as investigators struggled to piece together the truth from the fragments of her fractured memory. As the interrogation continued, the officers gently but firmly tried to break through Sabrina's fog of denial. One of them leaned in, his voice steady but probing. "Remember when we came to the house, you had the knife in your hand. Are you sure it wasn't so clear to you? There are always two sides to every story." Sabrina's eyes darted nervously as she absorbed the officer's words. The reality of what she had done seemed to hang in the air, pressing down on her. The officers knew they were walking a fine line, trying to coax out the truth without pushing her too far into a corner. They were offering her a chance to tell her side of the story, to bring clarity to the chaos that had unfolded that night. But Sabrina remained conflicted, her mind wrestling with the contradictions between her actions and her claimed memory loss. The tension in the room was palpable as the officers waited, hoping that Sabrina would break through the haze and provide the answers they desperately needed. The conversation was a delicate dance between uncovering the truth and navigating the fragile psyche of a young woman whose world had just shattered. Sabrina clung to her story, insisting that she remembered nothing of what had happened that night. However, the evidence against her was overwhelming and undeniable, painting a stark and irrefutable picture of the tragic events. The disconnect between her claimed amnesia and the brutal reality only deepened the emotional weight of the situation, leaving everyone involved grappling with the heartbreaking truth. The room was heavy with tension as the officer delivered the news, his tone somber yet firm. "You're under arrest," he began, pausing briefly to let the gravity of the words sink in. You know Lisa's dead, and it appears that you're responsible for that at this time. Sabrina's expression shifted as the full weight of the situation became undeniable. The officer's words were direct, leaving no room for ambiguity. This was the moment where the tragic reality of her actions came crashing down. The air in the room grew thick with the silent acknowledgement of what had been done, marking the end of the interrogation and the beginning of a new, darker chapter in Sabrina's life. Sabrina was booked and taken to jail, while on the outside, Kevin appeared to move on with his life almost immediately. He swiftly donated Lisa's belongings to Goodwill and attempted to sell her bedroom furniture on Craigslist. Kevin even asked his friend David to shut down Lisa's social media accounts, claiming he couldn't bear the constant influx of messages. Just 5 days after his wife's death on November 17th, Kevin hired a cleaning company to remove all traces of the horrific crime from their home. His demeanor was reportedly cold and matter-of-fact, as he told the cleaners that money was no object. After all, he had a $250,000 life insurance policy. But that wasn't the only policy Kevin stood to gain from. In the aftermath of Lisa's murder, he confided to one of her co-workers that replacing her $50,000 salary would be challenging, yet he more than managed it. Between various insurance policies from his employer and private insurers, Kevin collected approximately $785,000. He wasted no time putting this money to use. He paid off their previously foreclosed home, added a swimming pool, bought new cars, and even began taking flying lessons. While Sabrina languished in prison, awaiting trial for his wife's murder, Kevin was living a life of newfound comfort and luxury, his actions starkly contrasting the grief one might expect from a man who had just lost his wife. But 9 months later, the tide began to turn for Kevin. Sabrina, weary of bearing the full burden of guilt, decided she could no longer stay silent. She approached the police and revealed the truth about her relationship with Kevin, a truth that shattered the narrative he had so carefully constructed. Sabrina disclosed not only the details of their illicit relationship, but also the chilling reality of what had truly happened that night. She confessed that it was Kevin who had orchestrated the entire plan, telling her that Lisa needed to die. This revelation exposed Kevin's manipulations and deceit, turning the spotlight on him as the mastermind behind the tragic events. Throughout their relationship, Kevin had consistently told Sabrina that he wanted to divorce Lisa so they could be together. However, in September 2012, Kevin confessed a deeper fear that he might lose custody of the girls, including his own daughter Haley, if he pursued a divorce. It was then that Kevin revealed the existence of nearly $800,000 in life insurance policies on Lisa, coldly stating that, financially, Lisa was worth more dead than alive. He painted a future where, with Lisa out of the picture, he and Sabrina could be together and even start a family of their own. With this grim rationale in mind, the pair began to hatch a plan. They even discussed it with one of Sabrina's high school friends, Autumn Pavic, during a car ride to a Chinese buffet. The conversation turned dark as they explored the possibility of hiring one of Autumn's acquaintances to carry out a hit on Lisa. However, when Autumn moved to California in October, that particular plan fell through. But Kevin and Sabrina were undeterred. The idea of eliminating Lisa had taken root, and they continued to plot, driven by their twisted vision of a future together. In early November, their discussions took an even darker turn as they began to explore more specific and sinister methods. They considered using a pistol with a pillow to muffle the sound of the gunshot. The plan was straightforward but chilling. Sabrina would shoot Lisa while she slept, and then Kevin would take care of disposing of the gun, erasing any trace of their crime. The conversations between them reflected a cold, calculated intent, as they plotted to turn their twisted fantasy into a horrifying reality. As their twisted plotting continued, the plan evolved into something even more direct. They decided to use a gun. The idea was for Kevin to drop Sabrina off at the roller rink as a cover, while in reality she would join him at a shooting range to practice. However, when Lisa innocently questioned Kevin, asking, "Why don't you ever do anything with me anymore?" the plan hit a snag. Kevin, caught off guard by Lisa's remark, abandoned the idea that day, unable to follow through with their deadly scheme in that moment. It was a brief, unintended reprieve, driven by Lisa's simple desire for more time with her husband, an effort that unknowingly delayed the horrific fate Kevin and Sabrina were plotting. On the morning before the murder, Kevin was driving Sabrina to school, just as he always did. But this time, he pulled the car over and, uncharacteristically, became visibly upset. He recounted a fight he had had with Lisa, a confrontation so intense that he told Sabrina he couldn't bear it any longer, saying, "I can't stand it anymore. I'm going to kill myself if she's not dead." Sabrina, deeply in love with Kevin and desperate to ease his pain, assured him that she would kill Lisa as soon as the opportunity arose. Together, they meticulously planned the brutal attack. If Lisa was lying on her side, Sabrina was instructed to stab her in the back. If she was lying on her back, she was to stab her in the throat. The attack would need to take place at night while Lisa was asleep, and it had to be carried out without waking Haley, who often came into her mother's room in the middle of the night. A crucial part of their plan hinged on Sabrina's defense if she were caught. Kevin advised her to claim insanity, believing it would protect her from the full consequences of the crime. This was why Sabrina feigned ignorance during her police interview, insisting she didn't remember the attack. She thought it would support an insanity defense, just as Kevin had assured her it would. The entire scheme was a calculated mix of manipulation and desperation, driven by their shared desire to rid themselves of Lisa and the belief that they could outsmart the justice system. As Sabrina wrestled with the weight of their deadly plan, a moment of doubt crept in. She turned to Kevin, her voice filled with fear and uncertainty, and asked, "What if I go to prison?" Kevin, ever the manipulator, quickly reassured her. "You'll only do 25 years, he promised, as if that was a small price to pay. "I'll get you lawyers and I'll make sure that you're taken care of." His words were meant to calm her, to convince her that he would stand by her no matter what. But beneath his reassurances was a chilling coldness, a willingness to let Sabrina take the fall while he remained free. It was a promise that masked the true horror of their situation, and Sabrina, blinded by her love for him, clung to it, believing that Kevin would protect her in the end. 9 months later, the reality of Sabrina's situation became painfully clear. Kevin had not arranged for her legal defense as he had promised, and the insanity defense she had banked on was proving to be a dead end. It dawned on Sabrina that she had been manipulated, used by the very person she thought loved her. Realizing the depth of Kevin's betrayal, she decided to take matters into her own hands. Sabrina approached the prosecutors and offered to cooperate, seeking a plea deal in exchange for revealing the full extent of Kevin's involvement. She was ready to expose everything, every detail of Kevin's manipulation, every step of the twisted plan he had orchestrated. Sabrina's decision marked a turning point in the case, as she resolved to tell the truth, no matter the cost, in an effort to reclaim some semblance of control over her life. Kevin's seemingly perfect plan began to unravel as the police intensified their investigation. They reached out to Autumn Pavick, the friend who had been privy to some of the early discussions about hiring a hitman. Willing to assist the authorities, Autumn agreed to meet with Kevin, playing along to draw him out and gather more evidence. During their meeting, she subtly brought up the topic of the hitman, and unbeknownst to Kevin, the entire interaction was being recorded by the police. This critical moment marked the beginning of the end for Kevin's carefully constructed facade, as the evidence against him started to pile up, exposing the dark truths he had worked so hard to conceal. Kevin remained cautious during his conversation with Autumn, refusing to admit to anything incriminating. Despite the police executing multiple search warrants on Kevin's home, vehicles, and electronics, they found nothing that directly implicated him in the crime. However, Sabrina's testimony proved to be the critical piece of evidence needed. It was compelling enough for authorities to move forward, and in August 2013, Kevin was arrested and charged with complicity to commit aggravated murder and sexual battery. Meanwhile, Sabrina, fully aware of the consequences of her actions, pleaded guilty to aggravated murder. She was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. This means that Sabrina will be eligible for parole in 2042 when she will be 47 years old. Her plea marked the end of a tragic chapter, sealing her fate while also ensuring that Kevin would face justice for his role in the devastating events that unfolded within the Neufel family. Kevin, however, pleaded not guilty, steadfastly denying the charges against him. His defense argued that there was no concrete evidence of his affair with Sabrina or any plot to kill his wife. They pointed out that the entire case rested on Sabrina's testimony, a young woman with a troubled past, a history of substance abuse, and a pattern of unreliable behavior. The defense sought to cast doubt on her credibility, suggesting that her accusations were the product of a disturbed mind. But it was precisely this dynamic that made the case all the more chilling. Sabrina was young, unstable, and vulnerable, a perfect target for manipulation. Kevin had exploited these vulnerabilities, weaving a web of deceit that ultimately led to murder. On June 11, 2014, Kevin Knofel was found guilty on all counts. The court sentenced him to 2 years of imprisonment for each of the 6 counts of sexual battery and life in prison with eligibility for parole after 30 years for complicity to commit aggravated murder. The sentences were to be served consecutively, ensuring that Kevin would spend a significant portion of his life behind bars, paying the price for the crimes he had orchestrated and the lives he had destroyed. What role did Kevin's manipulation of Sabrina's vulnerabilities play in the outcome of the case? And how did the court view his influence over her actions? How did the lack of physical evidence impact Kevin's defense? And why was Sabrina's testimony ultimately considered credible enough to secure his conviction?
911, what's the address of your emergency?
Your guy thinks somebody else is on the line.
Okay.
I don't know what just happened.
Okay, were you injured? Were you injured? Okay, where are you?
Somebody else.
It was a quiet May 2014 evening in the lively college town of Isla Vista, California. The usual Friday night of laughter and activity metamorphosed into chaos as sirens cut through the air and scenes of terror unfolded across the community. By the end of the night, 6 were dead, 14 injured, and the quiet town was in shatters. The motives that became apparent in the days that followed painted a decidedly disturbing picture, one that, in many ways, challenged this nation to confront its darkness as well as where it had failed mass murderer. Let me take you through the video, revealing every shocking, astonishing detail of this case.
Hey, Elliot Roger here. Just took a nice walk in the park.
Elliot Oliver Robertson Roger was born to Peter Roger, the filmmaker who worked on some sections of The Hunger Games, and Lee Chin Roger, a research assistant.
I'm 22 years old, and I'm still a virgin. I've never even kissed a girl.
Elliot was born into a quite privileged environment in London, England, on July 24, 1991. His family later settled in California after moving to the United States while he was still growing up. Despite the affluence in his upbringing, there was much emotional turmoil arising throughout Roger's life. Elliot was socially awkward and struggled to make friends from an early age. Parents, though divorced at the age of 7, were involved in his life. As Roger reached his adolescent years, he continuously spoke about his feelings of loneliness and low self-esteem. As a teenager, Roger went to several schools without ever finding his place among his peers. He soon became obsessed with the pecking order, felt at the bottom of the pile, and blamed others for his miserable life. Entries in his diary and later in his manifesto make clear a growing resentment against peers who seemed more successful socially, particularly men he envied and women he thought had rejected him.
I've waited a long time for this. I'll give you exactly what you deserve, all of you. All you girls who rejected me and looked down upon me, and all of you men for living a better life than me. All of you sexually active men. I hate you. I hate all of you.
In the following years, Roger's mental health problems started to surface. He had received therapists, was diagnosed with Asperger's, and was experiencing bouts of depression. Yet all these interventions appeared to have little impact as deeper feelings of anger and frustration started to surface. As Elliot Roger approached his late teens and early 20s, the feelings of isolation and resentment that had plagued him for years became increasingly pronounced. Living in Isla Vista, a community known for its vibrant student life due to its proximity to the University of California, Santa Barbara, Roger found himself surrounded by the social interactions, relationships, and carefree fun he desperately desired but felt incapable of achieving. This environment only deepened his sense of alienation, as he felt perpetually on the outside looking in. In 2014, Roger began compiling his infamous 141-page manifesto titled My Twisted World. This document provides a detailed and chilling account of his life, from his childhood through his meticulously planned day of retribution. The manifesto offers unsettling insight into his thought process, revealing a young man consumed by entitlement, anger, and despair.
I can't wait to give you exactly what you deserve.
Key themes include his belief that women owed him their attention and affection, his envy and resentment toward men he perceived as more socially successful, his obsession with social status, and his grandiose fantasies of revenge. Roger repeatedly expressed outrage at women for rejecting him, believing romantic and sexual relationships to be his right. He blamed women collectively for his unhappiness and viewed men who attracted women with envy, expressing a desire to punish them for their perceived success. His manifesto also highlighted his fixation on achieving a lifestyle he believed he deserved, fueled by constant comparisons to peers, as well as his delusional vision of himself as a savior, punishing society for perceived injustices. Roger's frustrations found a toxic outlet online, where he became active in forums such as PUA Hate, a community focused on criticizing pickup artists while harboring deeply misogynistic views. These forums amplified Roger's grievances and validated his belief that women in society at large were to blame for his misery. His radicalization is further documented in the videos he uploaded to YouTube in the months leading up to the attack. In these clips, he lamented his virginity, berated women, and announced his plans for retribution. Despite their disturbing content, the videos went largely unnoticed outside his small audience until after the attack. In the months leading up to the killings, there were several missed opportunities for intervention. Roger's parents were aware of his struggles and had tried to intervene. His mother, alarmed by his disturbing YouTube videos, contacted authorities, but when law enforcement conducted a wellness check, they found Roger polite and composed, ultimately taking no action. Roger had been in therapy from a young age, but these efforts failed to address his escalating issues, partly due to his refusal to take prescribed medication. Despite living in a shared apartment, he had few meaningful connections, and his roommates ultimately became his first victims. By the time May 2014 arrived, Roger had meticulously planned his day of retribution, purchasing firearms and mapping out his attack. His manifesto and online activity made it clear that he saw this act as both revenge and a way to achieve notoriety. The tragic events of May 23, 2014, in Isla Vista, California, unfolded in 3 distinct phases, leaving 6 victims dead, 14 others injured, and an entire community devastated. Elliot Rodger meticulously planned his attack as described in his 141-page manifesto, intending to carry out a series of violent acts involving stabbing, shooting, and vehicular assault. His targets included his roommates, women he perceived as rejecting him, and random bystanders, underscoring the calculated and deeply personal nature of his grievances.
Elliot Rodger here. And here I am at Serrania Park, the most significant place of my childhood. I wish I could be a kid again. Those were the happy years, and I could just live my life without realizing how cruel the world really is.
The violence began in Roger's apartment with the brutal stabbings of his 2 roommates, George Chen and Chungyuan Hong, along with their friend Weihan Wang. These young men, aged 19 and 20, were completely unprepared for the ferocity of the attack, unable to defend themselves as Roger carried out his plan. In his manifesto, Roger expressed a deep resentment toward his roommates, whom he viewed as emblematic of his perceived social rejection and isolation. The act of stabbing these men in the very space they shared with him reflected a profoundly personal and disturbing aspect of Roger's anger, as he targeted those closest to him in the first phase of his assault. Following the murders in his apartment, Roger transitioned to the second phase of his attack. He uploaded a chilling final video to YouTube, titled Elliot Rodger's Retribution, in which he outlined his plans and articulated his hatred toward women and society at large. In the video, Roger spoke of exacting revenge for what he perceived as years of rejection and injustice, blaming women for not giving him the romantic and sexual relationships he felt entitled to, and society for allowing him to feel marginalized. With his manifesto and video acting as his final declarations, Roger set his deadly plans into motion. He drove to the Alpha Phi sorority house at the University of California, Santa Barbara, a location he had described in his manifesto as the hot spot of female perfection. According to his writings, this sorority house represented everything Roger despised about women, an idealized version of beauty and popularity that he believed had spurned him throughout his life. When Roger was unable to gain entry to the house, he turned his fury on bystanders outside, firing indiscriminately and killing two women, Catherine Cooper and Veronica Weiss. Cooper, 22, and Weiss, 19, were young UCSB students with bright futures ahead of them. Their lives senselessly cut short in the chaos of Roger's rampage. Roger's violence did not stop at the sorority house. He began driving through the streets of Isla Vista, targeting pedestrians and cyclists at random. His car became a mobile weapon, allowing him to move quickly between locations as he continued his shooting spree. During this phase, Roger stopped briefly at a deli, where he shot and killed Christopher Michaels Martinez, a 20-year-old UCSB student who had simply been inside the establishment. Michaels Martinez, like the other victims, was a vibrant young person with dreams and aspirations that would never be realized, a life stolen in the midst of Roger's escalating violence. The final phase of Roger's attack involved the use of his car as a weapon of destruction. As law enforcement began pursuing him, he drove recklessly through the streets of Isla Vista, running over pedestrians in his path. Witnesses described the chaos as Roger swerved erratically, intent on causing as much harm as possible before his plan reached its conclusion. The chase ended when Roger crashed into a parked car, bringing his rampage to an abrupt halt. When police approached his vehicle, they discovered that Roger had fatally shot himself in the head. Inside the car, authorities found 3 semi-automatic handguns and over 400 rounds of ammunition, evidence of the extensive planning and preparation Roger had undertaken in the lead-up to the attack. The victims of the Isla Vista killings were young individuals with promising futures, their lives and stories tragically cut short by Roger's actions. George Chen, 19, was described by friends and family as kind and academically driven, with a bright future ahead of him. Chung Yun Hong, 20, shared similar qualities, remembered for his gentle nature and close ties to his family. Wei Han Wang, 20, was a recent addition to the household and had dreams of academic and professional success. Catherine Cooper, 22, was a beloved UCSB student with a vibrant personality, while Veronica Weiss, 19, was remembered as a dedicated student and athlete who touched the lives of those around her. Christopher Michaels Martinez, 20, was a UCSB student with aspirations of becoming a lawyer, a young man known for his compassion and sense of justice. In the aftermath of the tragedy, the grief of the victims' families and the broader community became central to the public response. Parents and loved ones shared memories of those lost, turning their pain into advocacy for change. Richard Martinez, the father of Christopher Michaels Martinez, became a prominent voice in the push for gun control, channeling his grief into a call for action to prevent future tragedies. The senseless loss of these young lives highlighted not only the devastating consequences of Roger's actions, but also the systemic issues that allowed his violence to escalate unchecked.
Parents used to always take me here when I was a kid, back when my life was happy and fair, back when I thought the world was fair. How naive I was. I was only an innocent child.
The Isla Vista killings underscored significant failings in recognizing and addressing warning signs. In the months leading up to the attack, there were numerous opportunities for intervention that went unheeded. Roger's parents had expressed concerns about his mental health, and his mother had alerted authorities after viewing his disturbing YouTube videos. However, when law enforcement conducted a wellness check at Roger's apartment, they found him polite and composed, ultimately taking no action. This failure to recognize the severity of the threat Roger posed reflected broader challenges in addressing mental health crises and the limitations of current systems in preventing violence. Roger's extensive history of therapy and mental health struggles also came into sharp focus. Diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome and experiencing bouts of depression, Roger had been in therapy for much of his life. Despite these efforts, his refusal to take prescribed medication and his increasing isolation rendered these interventions insufficient.
This is my usual sunset spot, mainly because there's rarely any young couples here that I would get jealous of.
His online activity, particularly his participation in misogynistic forums like PUA hate, further exacerbated his grievances and radicalized his worldview. These platforms provided a toxic echo chamber that validated Rogers' anger and entitlement, reinforcing his belief that women in society were to blame for his misery. The events of May 23, 2014, revealed the devastating consequences of unchecked anger, entitlement, and alienation. They also highlighted systemic issues in identifying and addressing warning signs, as well as the role of online communities in fostering radicalization. The victims' stories and the pain of their families remain a stark reminder of the human cost of such tragedies, emphasizing the need for a multifaceted approach to prevention, including mental health support, gun control, and addressing toxic cultural narratives. As Isla Vista continues to heal, the memory of those lost serves as a call to action to build a safer, more compassionate society. The Isla Vista killings remain a chilling reminder of how personal grievances, untreated mental health challenges, and online radicalization can intertwine to produce devastating violence. Elliot Rogers' actions, as chronicled in his manifesto and video statements, were the product of a complex interplay of factors, each demanding careful analysis to prevent similar tragedies in the future. At the core of Rogers' motives was a deeply entrenched misogyny. He believed that women owed him affection and sexual attention, framing his violent actions as retribution against a society he saw as unfairly denying him what he felt entitled to. His manifesto and videos reveal an obsessive fixation on his virginity and a simmering resentment toward women whom he blamed for his unhappiness. This entitlement fueled his hatred, positioning women as the primary targets of his grievances. Rogers' ideology was emblematic of the growing incel, involuntary celibate movement, a term that gained notoriety after his attacks but had already begun to coalesce in online communities at the time. Rogers' engagement with online forums such as PUA Hate, an anti-pickup artist community, provided fertile ground for his toxic beliefs to deepen. These platforms served as echo chambers, validating his anger and amplifying his misogynistic views. While the incel movement encompasses a range of ideologies, its core often perpetuates harmful narratives that dehumanize women and encourage hostility. Within these communities, Roger became a symbol of violent resistance, with some participants lionizing him as a figure of revenge against perceived societal injustices. This dangerous glorification underscores the unchecked radicalization that can occur in such online spaces, where vulnerable individuals find validation for destructive thoughts. Rogers' mental health struggles were another significant factor in the tragedy. Diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome and experiencing depression, he exhibited clear signs of social isolation and distress from an early age. Despite years of therapy and his family's attempts to support him, his condition deteriorated as he aged.
I've been cast out. No one likes me. No one accepts me. All my life I've been struggling to fit in with the popular kids. I've been struggling to get a girlfriend. No one has ever accepted me.
Rogers' refusal to fully engage with treatment or take prescribed medication limited the effectiveness of these interventions, leaving him to spiral further into anger and resentment.
Hey, Elliot Roger here. I'm sitting in my car, making another entry in my collection of vlogs. Ever since I hit puberty, I've wanted girls. I've desired girls. I've been sexually attracted to girls. But they've never shown any attraction back to me.
His manifesto details his long-standing feelings of inadequacy and rejection, offering a window into the mind of someone unable to reconcile his expectations with reality. The system failed to address Rogers' escalating behavior adequately, despite clear warning signs. In the weeks leading up to the attack, his mother alerted authorities to his disturbing online activity, prompting a wellness check by law enforcement. However, when deputies visited him, Roger presented himself as calm and polite, leading them to dismiss the concerns. This interaction highlighted a critical gap in assessing and managing mental health crises, as well as the challenges of identifying underlying threats when an individual does not outwardly display alarming behavior. A more thorough investigation could have uncovered his growing arsenal of firearms, the manifesto outlining his plans, or other red flags, potentially averting the tragedy. Rogers' access to firearms was another enabling factor in the attack. Over the course of a year, he legally purchased 3 semi-automatic handguns, passing all required background checks despite his documented mental health issues. This aspect of the case reignited national debates about gun control, particularly regarding access to firearms for individuals with known mental health challenges. In response, California enacted the Gun Violence Restraining Order law, allowing family members and law enforcement to petition for the temporary removal of firearms from individuals deemed a danger to themselves or others. While this legislation represents progress, it also highlights the gaps that allowed Roger to arm himself and carry out his plans despite clear signs of distress and danger. Beyond individual factors, Roger's story reflects broader cultural and social issues. Toxic masculinity, the societal expectation that men must achieve specific markers of success, such as romantic relationships, financial status, or social dominance, exacerbated Roger's feelings of inadequacy. His manifesto reveals the destructive impact of these pressures, particularly when coupled with an inability to cope with rejection or perceived failure. Roger's belief that his self-worth was tied to romantic and sexual success left him vulnerable to intense feelings of resentment and entitlement when reality fell short of his expectations. The internet played a critical role in fostering and amplifying Roger's grievances. Online spaces provided him with a platform to express his frustrations and connect with like-minded individuals who reinforced his toxic worldview. The anonymity and insularity of these forums created an environment where harmful ideologies could thrive unchecked, emboldening Roger's sense of victimhood and fueling his plans for revenge. This case highlights the dangers of online radicalization, where individuals can be drawn into echo chambers that validate and escalate their most destructive thoughts. The Isla Vista killings serve as a stark reminder of the multifaceted nature of mass violence and the systemic failures that can enable it. Addressing the underlying issues requires a comprehensive approach. Improved mental health resources and interventions are crucial, particularly for individuals who exhibit early signs of social isolation or distress. Law enforcement must receive better training in identifying and responding to mental health crises, with a focus on assessing potential threats beyond surface-level interactions. Stricter regulations on firearm access, particularly for individuals with known mental health challenges, are essential to prevent future tragedies. Equally important is the need to challenge harmful cultural narratives. Combating toxic masculinity and addressing the unrealistic pressures placed on men to achieve specific ideals can help reduce feelings of entitlement and inadequacy. Efforts to monitor and counteract radicalization in online spaces are also critical, ensuring that vulnerable individuals do not find validation for destructive ideologies. The victims of the Isla Vista killings, George Chen, Chung Yuan Hong, Weihan Wang, Catherine Cooper, Veronica Weiss, and Christopher Michaels Martinez, were young individuals with promising futures, tragically cut short by Roger's actions. Their stories and the grief of their families continue to resonate, serving as a call to action for meaningful change. By addressing the interconnected factors that contributed to this tragedy, society can work to prevent similar events and honor the memory of those lost. The aftermath of the Isla Vista killings was a period marked by profound grief, public outrage, and a collective determination to address the and systemic issues that contributed to the tragedy. Families of the victims, particularly Richard Martinez, father of Christopher Michaels Martinez, emerged as vocal advocates for change. Martinez's impassioned plea, "Not one more," became a rallying cry for those calling for stricter gun control and greater accountability. His voice galvanized a movement, uniting activists, lawmakers, and communities in a shared demand to prevent future tragedies. The Isla Vista killings prompted significant legislative action, particularly in California, where reforms were introduced to address some of the systemic failures highlighted by the case. Among the most notable was the introduction of the Gun Violence Restraining Order, GVRO, a law designed to empower courts to temporarily prohibit individuals deemed a threat to themselves or others from accessing firearms. The GVRO became a model for similar legislation in other states, offering families and law enforcement a critical tool for intervening when red flags emerge. This legislation reflected a growing recognition of the need to balance individual rights with public safety in cases involving mental health crises and potential violence. In addition to gun control reforms, the tragedy spurred efforts to enhance mental health interventions. The Isla Vista killings exposed significant gaps in how mental health issues were identified and addressed, particularly for individuals who resist treatment or display warning signs without overtly threatening behavior. California responded by implementing measures to improve collaboration between healthcare providers and law enforcement, aiming to create a more cohesive system for recognizing and responding to potential threats. While these changes represent important progress, the broader national debates surrounding gun control and mental health care remain deeply polarized and unresolved. Elliot Rodger's actions and the manifesto he left behind forced society to confront uncomfortable truths about misogyny, toxic masculinity, and the radicalizing influence of online communities. His deep-seated resentment toward women and belief in male entitlement highlighted the pervasive nature of harmful gender dynamics that often go unaddressed. The attack brought the term incel, short for involuntary celibate, into mainstream discourse, exposing a subculture that, while diverse in its expressions, often perpetuates hatred toward women and reinforces damaging stereotypes about relationships and societal expectations. The Isla Vista killings sparked widespread discussions about how societal norms and cultural narratives contribute to feelings of inadequacy and entitlement, particularly among young men. Toxic masculinity, the expectation that men must achieve dominance, success, and romantic relationships to validate their self-worth, emerged as a key issue in understanding Rodger's grievances. His manifesto and online activity revealed how these pressures, coupled with social isolation, can fester into dangerous resentment. The case also shone a light on the role of online communities in radicalizing vulnerable individuals. Platforms like PUA Hate, where Rodger found validation for his toxic beliefs, were identified as echo chambers that amplify anger and misogyny. These forums allowed Rodger to connect with others who shared his frustrations, reinforcing and escalating his sense of victimhood and entitlement. The incident underscored the urgent need for greater scrutiny of harmful online spaces and more proactive measures to counteract the spread of radical ideologies. Rodger's mental health struggles and resistance to treatment were central to the tragedy, highlighting the challenges of addressing mental health crises, particularly for young men. His refusal to fully engage with therapy and medication underscored the limitations of voluntary interventions in cases where individuals are unwilling or unable to acknowledge the severity of their issues. Advocates have since called for greater public awareness of mental health, early intervention programs, and efforts to destigmatize seeking help, especially among men who may feel societal pressure to suppress vulnerability. The case also illuminated systemic shortcomings in recognizing and responding to warning signs. Law enforcement's wellness check at Rodger's apartment, conducted just weeks before the attack, was a missed opportunity for intervention. Despite his mother's concerns and the disturbing content of his online videos, deputies found Rodger calm and polite, ultimately taking no further action. This failure underscored the need for better training for law enforcement in assessing mental health crises and understanding the nuanced behaviors of potentially dangerous individuals. The Isla Vista killings left an indelible mark on societal discourse, pushing issues such as gun control, mental health care, misogyny, and online radicalization to the forefront of public consciousness. While legislative changes like the GVRO represent meaningful progress, much work remains to address the root causes of such tragedies. This includes fostering a culture that promotes mental well-being, challenges harmful gender norms, and counters the spread of extremist ideologies online. As the community continues to heal, the stories of the victims and the advocacy of their families serve as a powerful reminder of the need for change. Their loss is a call to action, a demand for a society that prioritizes compassion, safety, and accountability. By addressing the interconnected factors that contributed to the Isla Vista killings, there is hope that similar tragedies can be prevented, honoring the memory of those whose lives were tragically cut short. The Isla Vista killings stand as a sobering reminder of the complex interplay between personal struggles, pressures, and systemic failures. Elliot Rodgers' descent into violence was not an inevitability, but rather the tragic outcome of missed warning signs, untreated mental health challenges, and toxic ideologies that thrived in isolation and online spaces. This case compels us to confront these issues with urgency and compassion. As we reflect on this tragedy, it becomes clear that early intervention, stronger systems of accountability, and proactive efforts to challenge the cultural and structural forces that perpetuate misogyny and violence are essential. The Isla Vista victims' legacy calls for continued advocacy and action to create a safer, more inclusive, and compassionate society. Legislative reforms like California's gun violence restraining order mark important progress, but they are just the beginning. To prevent future tragedies, we must tackle the deeper roots of alienation, entitlement, and radicalization that lead individuals down such destructive paths. This means fostering a culture that values mental health, promotes healthy social connections, and confronts harmful narratives head-on. By learning from the Isla Vista killings, we honor the memories of those whose lives were tragically cut short. Their loss serves as a powerful call to action, a reminder of our shared responsibility to build a world where such violence becomes unthinkable. Together, we can reaffirm our commitment to ensuring that no more lives are lost to preventable tragedies. Thank you for watching this video and for taking the time to engage with this important topic. If you found this content meaningful, please like the video, share it with others, and subscribe to the channel for more discussions that matter. Thank you. This is a case where nothing is as it seems, where the truth hides behind a web of lies, love, and betrayal. Stephen Franklin, born on November 27, 1924, in the heart of Travis County, Austin, Texas, was an only child. His parents, Stephen and Mildred, showered him with love, and from a young age, he radiated that love right back. After high school, Stephen set off for college at the University of Georgia, diving into advertising and marketing. But in the early 1940s, his studies were interrupted. War had broken out, and as fate would have it, Stephen was drafted into the Navy. Trained as a pilot, he served until the war ended in 1945. Once back home, he resumed his studies and graduated. In 1947, Stephen met Elise Adams. Friends described them as twin flames, inseparable best friends who did everything together. On April 10, 1948, they tied the knot, and a year later, Stephen found work in sales at a radio station, pitching airwaves to potential advertisers. The couple welcomed their first child, Stephen III, in 1949, and soon after, a daughter, Becky, arrived in 1952. By then, Stephen's career ambitions were growing, and he left the radio gig for a better-paying role as an assistant to the president at an ad firm, where he thrived. Their family grew once more in 1953 with the arrival of their third child, Paul. With success fueling him, Stephen moved into a general manager position at a media station, earning enough to retire early. But Stephen was no armchair retiree. Soon he turned his attention to real estate and eventually launched his own media and broadcasting company, co-founding the Fox affiliate KBOV, which brought in more wealth than he had imagined. The Beards settled into a life of luxury. Elise embraced the role of a trophy wife, often throwing grand parties at their sprawling home, while Stephen played golf at the local country club. They were the picture-perfect couple, wealthy, in love, and living an enviable life. Elise was Stephen's rock through everything, his biggest supporter. Whether he was working odd jobs, starting his own business, or raising their kids, Elise was by his side, cheering him on. They even had 2 dogs together, Nikki and Megan. Megan was Elise's favorite, while Nikki was always around to lighten their days. Life was good, and Stephen enjoyed the luxuries his success brought, even riding around town in a limo. Not because he didn't know how to drive, but simply because he could afford it. Then in 1993, tragedy struck. After 45 years of marriage, Elise was diagnosed with terminal brain cancer. It was a crushing blow to Stephen and their entire family. For decades, they'd been best friends, practically inseparable, and Stephen couldn't imagine life without her. But in October of that year, Elise passed away at 67, leaving Stephen heartbroken and alone. By then, their 3 children were adults, each with their own lives, which meant Stephen was left alone in their big house, grappling with his grief. To cope, he took up drinking, trying to drown the emptiness in the silence of his once busy home. Just 2 weeks later, he went to the country club, which he used to enjoy with Elise. There he noticed Celeste Martinez, a 30-year-old waitress he'd seen many times, but had never really spoken to. This time, feeling lonely, he asked her to dinner, setting in motion a story no one could have predicted. Now, Celeste's past was far from easy. Born on February 13th, 1963, in California, she was adopted as a baby by Nancy and Edwin. Her birth mother had harshly rejected her attempts to reconnect, dismissing her as just an incubator. Her adoptive father, Edwin, was abusive, and Celeste grew up feeling unwanted. By 17, she moved out with her boyfriend, Craig Batcher, who'd also had a difficult childhood. They married young, and she soon discovered she was pregnant, with twins. But Craig soon fell into drugs and became violent, eventually landing in jail after assaulting Celeste and the kids. Celeste left him, sparking a fierce custody battle for their daughters, Jennifer and Christina. During the trouble, she briefly married an Air Force mechanic named Harold Wolf in 1991, only for him to disappear from her life by the year's end. When Stephen reached out to her in his own moment of loneliness, Celeste seemed to see in him a way out of her troubled past. But as they grew closer, few could have guessed how much more tangled their lives would soon become. After Celeste's brief marriage to Harold ended, she married Jimmy Martinez in 1992. Seeking a fresh start, they left California for Texas, hoping to build a new life. It was in Texas that Celeste found work as a waitress at a country club. At the club, she had served Stephen and Elise several times, getting to know Stephen as a regular customer who had very specific requests, particularly when it came to his vodka. Elise was always by his side, but after her passing, Stephen began to visit the club more often. And that's when he finally approached Celeste. Celeste, also going through a difficult time, having just divorced Jimmy and dealing with a custody battle with her ex-husband Craig, was not looking for a relationship but found a connection with Stephen. They were both grieving and struggling with life changes, so they leaned on each other for support. They began dating, and as their bond grew stronger, Stephen offered Celeste a job as his full-time house assistant. Celeste left the country club and started managing Stephen's household, handling everything from cooking and cleaning to caring for the dogs. Stephen, eager to spoil her, treated Celeste to a lavish lifestyle. She got a whole new wardrobe, jewelry, and traveled with him everywhere, living a life of luxury she had never imagined before. On February 18th, 1995, they got married. Stephen was 70 and Celeste was 32. Their significant age gap raised eyebrows, especially among their families. Stephen's children and Celeste's kids were skeptical about the relationship, suspecting Celeste might be using Stephen for his money. Yet despite their doubts, they kept quiet because they saw Stephen genuinely happy for the first time in years. He seemed in love with Celeste, and that brought him a sense of joy he hadn't felt since Elise's death. Soon after their marriage, Stephen built a mansion in Toro Canyon for himself, Celeste, and her twin daughters, Jennifer and Christina. Their lives completely changed. They moved from a modest lifestyle into a gated community, and the twins were given their own rooms, new clothes, and private schooling. Celeste also enjoyed the fruits of Stephen's wealth, more luxury, a new social circle, and a lifestyle that was the complete opposite of what she had known before. It was a complete turnaround for Celeste and her daughters, who had gone from struggling to thriving in an instant. Celeste had designer clothes with tags still on them, new shoes she hadn't even worn, and an ever-growing collection of jewelry. Celeste didn't hesitate to spend Stephen's money, using her weekly allowance to shop for whatever caught her eye. It was said that their relationship was more about material gain than emotional connection, as Celeste herself mentioned that she and Stephen rarely had sexual interactions, only once a week on Sundays. Despite her lavish lifestyle, Celeste was still battling for full custody of her twin daughters, Jennifer and Christina, from her ex-husband Craig. With Stephen by her side, she had access to top-tier lawyers, but the courts ruled in 1995 that Christina would live with Celeste while Jennifer would stay with Craig. However, in 1996, Craig tragically took his own life, which led to Jennifer moving in with Celeste and Stephen. The girls, still grieving the loss of their father, found it difficult to adjust to Stephen as their new father figure. But over time, they warmed up to him, realizing how much he genuinely cared for them. In 1999, when Jennifer and Christina were 17, Stephen legally adopted them, solidifying their bond as a family. However, behind closed doors, the household was far from perfect. There were frequent arguments between Celeste and Stephen, as well as tensions with the girls. Things reached a breaking point when Celeste, in a heated moment, threatened in front of Stephen and the girls. The family, horrified, managed to calm her down and decided that Celeste needed professional help. They admitted her to the St. David's Pavilion Mental Hospital, where she began treatment. While in the hospital, Celeste received support from her family, especially Christina, who visited her every day to ensure she was well cared for. During one of these visits, Christina encouraged Celeste to make friends. Now Celeste took this advice to heart, and that's when she met Tracy Tarleton. Tracy came from a wealthy background in Fort Worth, Texas, where her father was a well-known attorney. As a child, she was a tomboy, often spending time hunting and fishing with her two brothers. Though well-liked for her sociable personality, Tracy struggled with her sexuality, knowing from a young age that she was gay, but too afraid to tell anyone due to her strict family. She kept this to herself, finding peace in friendships at school and in her summer camp experiences. Tracy was known to be wild and mischievous, often getting into trouble by provoking strangers and starting fights, much to the surprise of her fellow counselors. But her behavior, though alarming, was something she found amusing, even if others didn't.
Tracy Tarleton is bipolar and has been in and out of psychiatric wards for years. Tracy was severely abused by her mother, grew up in basically sort of an alcoholic, dysfunctional, very successful society Texas family.
Tracy's life, filled with wild behavior and rowdiness, seemed to be a manifestation of deeper issues. Her anger problems, often directed at random people, were thought to stem from the emotional weight of suppressing her sexuality. As a child, she struggled with the fact that she was a lesbian in a family that held very strict expectations for her future, getting married and having children. But Tracy knew that this path wasn't one that would bring her happiness. Instead of confronting these feelings, she bottled them up, hoping they would go away. But it only made things worse. After high school, Tracy went to college for biology, hoping that joining a sorority might help her break out of her shell and relieve some of the pressure she felt from her family's expectations. However, the stress only mounted. Her family's constant reminders about having children weighed heavily on her, and Tracy found herself turning to alcohol to numb the pain. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough to escape her inner turmoil, and she even attempted during her time in college. When that attempt failed, Tracy dropped out of school, feeling like it just wasn't the right place for her. As she struggled with substances, particularly heroin, Tracy eventually checked herself into rehab in 1989. She cleaned up and returned to school, earning her degree in biology. She landed a demanding job as a general manager at a bookstore called Book People, where she worked long hours managing a large staff. This job, though stressful, allowed Tracy to escape her internal struggles, but it was an unhealthy distraction. Eventually, the pressure became too much, and Tracy had a major meltdown at work, exploding in front of her boss, customers, and staff. Concerned for her well-being, Tracy was admitted to the same mental health facility where Celeste was being treated. When Celeste and Tracy met at the St. David's Pavilion, they instantly clicked. Their shared experiences of childhood bonded them deeply, and their common interests in movies and music made it easy for them to connect. After leaving the facility, their friendship blossomed. They were often together, with Celeste spoiling Tracy in the same way Stephen had once spoiled her. They went out to fancy restaurants, flew first class, and Celeste bought Tracy clothes and jewelry. While others saw their relationship as an unusually close friendship, it was clear that their bond was more intense than what most would consider typical.
Tracy has been desperately seeking love probably since she was about 10 years old. And she finally found someone she thought loved her.
One incident, however, raised some eyebrows. A nurse at the facility walked in on Tracy and Celeste getting a little too intimate in Tracy's room. This forced the staff to separate them, with each girl being placed on a different wing of the hospital. Despite the separation, their friendship continued to grow, with Celeste continuing to shower Tracy with gifts and attention. What appeared to others as an innocent friendship seemed to be something much deeper and more complicated. Celeste and Tracy's relationship raised more than a few eyebrows, as their behavior in public seemed more intimate than what would be expected of just close friends. Celeste would often sit on Tracy's lap, and Tracy frequently played with Celeste's hair or whispered in her ear. They were undeniably touchy-feely with each other, even in front of others, which made many people uncomfortable. Celeste's daughters were no exception, feeling uneasy about their close relationship, especially considering that Celeste was married to Stephen. When confronted, Celeste downplayed it, dismissing their bond as nothing more than a friendship, claiming, "Tracy is a lesbian, but I'm not. Just because we're close doesn't mean anything."
It was obvious when they were together by the way they would touch each other and smile that it wasn't purely platonic.
However, the situation took a darker turn when Celeste's daughters, Christina and Jennifer, discovered that Tracy and Celeste had been involved in a more intimate way. Christina confided in Jennifer, telling her that she had caught Tracy and Celeste kissing in one of the guest rooms. Alarmed, Jennifer and Christina decided to confront Stephen about what they had witnessed. Furious, Stephen demanded that Celeste end her relationship with Tracy, forbidding her from bringing Tracy into their home again. Although Celeste reluctantly agreed, it was clear that this promise was empty, as she continued to maintain contact with Tracy, often talking and spending time with her outside of the house. Then one fateful night in October 1999, around 3 a.m., Stephen woke up to an excruciating pain in his stomach. Bleeding, he was unable to understand what had happened and tried to call out for Celeste, but she wasn't in their room. Celeste had been sleeping in Jennifer's room that night as Jennifer was away. Stephen, in a panic, managed to grab a phone and call 911.
3900 Toro Canyon Road, hurry. My gut just jumped out of my stomach. They blew out. Yeah, they blew out of my stomach.
Despite his efforts to call for help, the large house and its layout made it difficult for anyone in the other wing to hear him.
I can remember Jen just immediately started crying. And there was lots of panic, lots of confusion, because we didn't have the whole story.
By the time the ambulance and police arrived, Celeste woke up and was startled to find a police officer standing outside Stephen's room. She demanded to see her husband but was prevented from entering. When the officer explained that Stephen had suffered a stomach injury, Celeste became hysterical and insisted on seeing him. The police then began questioning her, asking if Stephen had undergone any recent surgeries, to which she responded negatively. It was then that a detective noticed a shell casing on the floor of the bedroom, indicating that Stephen had been shot. As the investigation unfolded, the police found further clues that pointed toward foul play. The scene was far from a robbery. Valuable items in the room had been untouched, and the gate to the property was wide open. Moreover, Stephen's sliding glass door was unlocked, and the home's automatic security system had been deactivated. These strange findings raised more suspicion, and as Stephen was rushed to the hospital for surgery, the police continued to piece together the evidence. The detectives continued their questioning of Celeste while she anxiously waited for news on Stephen's surgery. According to Celeste, she and Stephen had gone to bed between 9:30 and 10 p.m. the previous night. Afterwards, she said she went to the lake house to check on Jennifer and her boyfriend, which was about a 40-minute drive away. She claimed to have returned home, stopped for gas, and checked on Stephen before going to sleep in Jennifer's room, as Stephen's sleep machine was too loud. When asked if she had any idea who might have been behind the shooting, Celeste insisted there were no issues in their marriage, and she couldn't think of any enemies Stephen might have had. They were even supposed to leave for Europe the following day. She was puzzled about who would want to harm her husband. Meanwhile, Jennifer, who had been at the lake house, received the alarming news from Celeste and rushed to the hospital. When the police questioned Jennifer, her boyfriend suggested that the shooter could be Crazy Tracy, which caught the detectives' attention. Jennifer shared details of the close, possibly romantic relationship between Celeste and Tracy. The police now had a lead and sought out Tracy. When the police arrived at Tracy's house, she was initially compliant, but shocked when informed she was a suspect in the attempted murder. She denied any involvement, questioning the police about the details of the crime. The detectives were particularly interested in Tracy's gun, knowing she enjoyed hunting. When they asked to see it, her hesitant response raised their suspicions. Tracy eventually agreed to hand over the gun, saying it had recently been fired, but not at the Beard household. As they examined Tracy's apartment, the detectives noticed numerous photos of her with Celeste, which seemed more personal than typical friendship pictures. Tracy provided a timeline of her evening, saying she had gone to a shooting range, had beers and pizza, and then went home to sleep. The police collected her gun for testing to see if it matched the shell casing found at the crime scene. By this point, Stephen had survived surgery and was recovering. The police planned to question him next to see if he could offer any clues about the identity of his attacker. As Stephen recovered in the hospital, the detectives faced a major roadblock: Celeste. Every time they tried to ask Stephen about the shooting, Celeste stood in their way, acting as a fierce protector. She argued that it was disrespectful to question him so soon after surgery, despite the police trying to explain that they were only trying to help. They even asked her, "Don't you want to know who shot your husband?" But Celeste remained firm, refusing to let them speak with Stephen. Her protective stance reached the point where she hired a defense attorney to shield her from the police's questioning, which raised even more suspicion. The police couldn't understand why she was so determined to prevent them from talking to Stephen, especially when it seemed like the natural thing for a wife to want to know who was responsible for hurting her husband. With no way of getting information from Stephen, the detectives turned their focus to Tracy. They uncovered a disturbing link between Tracy and the shooting of Zan's husband, a former best friend. It was speculated, though never proven, that Tracy had been involved in the death of Zan's husband, who allegedly shot himself. Just as unsettling, Zan and Tracy had moved in together after the husband's death, living as a couple and isolating themselves from their friends. The detectives couldn't help but notice the eerie similarities between the incidents. Tracy had been involved in the shooting of one husband, and now Stephen Beard, her best friend's husband, had been shot. It seemed like the same pattern was repeating itself. The investigation dug deeper, and they found more disturbing details. After Tracy and Zan parted ways, Tracy had a breakdown at work and ended up meeting Celeste. This pattern was raising red flags for the police, not just for Celeste, but for her children as well. The thought that Tracy might harm Celeste's kids was a chilling concern. It was around this time that the forensic evidence came in. Tracy's gun matched the shell casing found at the crime scene. On November 4th, 1999, Tracy was arrested and charged with the shooting of Stephen, though she was released after posting bail. Stephen's recovery continued at a slow pace, with multiple surgeries and months of physical therapy. Finally, on January 18, 2000, he was able to return home. He was happy to be back with his dogs, especially Megan, Elise's dog. But just one day after returning home, Stephen suffered cardiac arrest and was rushed back to the hospital. Doctors discovered a severe infection in his system, but they couldn't pinpoint where it had originated. Sadly, on January 22, 2000, at the age of 75, Stephen passed away in the hospital. But here's a twist. The night Stephen passed away, Tracy's world also started to unravel. Upon hearing the news of Stephen's death, she realized that her charges for attempted murder would likely escalate to murder. Desperate to avoid facing the consequences, Tracy attempted to end her life by mixing drugs and alcohol. Fortunately, she was unsuccessful and was rushed to the hospital, where she survived. Meanwhile, as February 16, 2001, rolled around, the police began questioning Tracy. However, she refused to speak about her relationship with Celeste, refused to discuss the incident, and remained silent throughout the entire questioning. Her silence only deepened the mystery. Now Celeste did speak to the police, but her words and actions didn't align. She confessed that she felt deeply guilty and had fallen into a depression after Stephen's death, but her actions suggested otherwise. The very day after Stephen died, Celeste called the bank to inquire about how much money she would receive from Stephen's will. Stephen had set up an allowance for Celeste, ensuring that she wouldn't squander all his money at once. This act felt cold and calculated, especially considering the grief her daughters, Jennifer and Christina, were experiencing. Jennifer and Christina were devastated by Stephen's death. They had always seen him as a father figure, as he had adopted them, supported them, and treated them with love. But Celeste's behavior, especially her distant behavior, left them with a gut feeling that something was wrong. Their fears grew stronger when Celeste began spending money casually, hosting parties, hiring an assistant, and even starting a relationship with a bartender named Spencer Cole Johnson. To Jennifer and Christina, it seemed like their mother wasn't affected by Stephen's death at all, and they began to suspect she might have played a role in his shooting. Further investigation revealed troubling details about Celeste's past. Friends shared that she had had an affair with her previous husband, Jimmy Martinez, during her marriage to Stephen. Celeste even admitted this affair to the police, stating that Stephen had forgiven her and they had planned a European trip to renew their vows the following day. This revelation painted a picture of Celeste as someone who lacked empathy and seemed to view the people in her life as tools for her own benefit.
You better get your help tonight. Do you understand that? Because if you don't, you will be sorry.
Now Jennifer and Christina's suspicions grew, and they decided to take matters into their own hands. They went to the police and shared their concerns about Celeste's behavior. Jennifer told the police that on the night Stephen was shot, Celeste had visited the lake house where she and her boyfriend were staying. Celeste had brought along Megan, Stephen's dog, a strange move considering how close the dog was to Stephen. Megan was known to be so attached to Stephen that she would cry whenever he left. The fact that Celeste brought the dog to the lake house seemed odd, and the police began to wonder if Celeste knew more than she was letting on. They theorized that Celeste might have brought Megan to ensure the dog wouldn't bark when Tracy entered the house to carry out the shooting, preventing Stephen from waking up and stopping the plan. Celeste's involvement in the shocking events surrounding her husband Stephen's death seemed undeniable, but it was still unclear just how much she had known or how deep her role truly went. Jennifer, Stephen's daughter, couldn't shake off her growing suspicions about her mother. Celeste had told her a strange story about Stephen being drunk and abusive toward her and their dog, Megan, the night he died. But Jennifer found it hard to believe. Stephen had always been kind to Megan, and violence wasn't part of his character. This story, along with others that Jennifer and her sister Christina shared with the police, painted a troubling picture of Celeste's actions. Jennifer and Christina feared their mother might harm them next to claim their inheritance. Disturbing memories from the past surfaced, too. Jennifer and Christina had caught Celeste secretly tampering with Stephen's food, crushing sleeping pills into his meals, and replacing his vodka with Everclear to keep him subdued. Celeste had even made unsettling comments about planning for death, talking about buying caskets for herself and her family. All of this painted a terrifying picture of a woman who seemed to have no empathy for anyone, including her own children. Despite a restraining order against her, Celeste's behavior remained unchanged. She married Cole, sold Stephen's house for $2 million, and used the money for her own selfish desires. Meanwhile, Tracy, still in jail, had no idea about Celeste's new life. She believed Celeste was grieving deeply, but when Tracy discovered through the media that Celeste had moved on, she was shocked. It became clear to Tracy that she had been manipulated all along. Celeste had used her to kill Stephen and secure his money.
I asked someone, why did Tracy finally turn, thinking, oh, it's because she's about to go to prison and facing possibly the death penalty of life at best? And they said because she finally realized that Celeste didn't love her.
Now here's the twist. In a moment of realization, Tracy cooperated fully with the police, confessing to everything. She revealed the secret relationship between her and Celeste, and how Celeste had described her marriage as emotionally abusive, even attempting to poison Stephen on multiple occasions. The plan to kill Stephen was put into motion, and Tracy, feeling cornered, reluctantly followed through with it. But after Stephen survived, Celeste assured her he would die from a secondary infection. As Tracy shared more details, it became clear that Celeste's involvement was far more extensive than anyone had imagined.
What did she say about exactly how she wanted you to shoot him?
She wanted me to shoot him in the stomach.
Why did she want you to shoot him in the stomach?
Because she didn't want splatter. She didn't want blood splatter on the wall.
Okay. Is that the word she used, splatter?
She used splatter.
Okay. Did she say why she didn't want a blood splatter on the wall?
She, at the time, was not planning on redecorating.
So she wanted to continue to be in that room but not mess it up? Sustained as to that question.
Yes. She didn't want to redecorate and she didn't want to live with anything on the wall that would remind her of what had happened, I guess.
So after you saw Steve Beard and you were in there in the bedroom, what, if anything, did you do?
I walked to the foot of the bed and I shot him in the stomach.
Tracy's confession was a turning point in the investigation. She was offered a reduced sentence of 20 years for her cooperation, and Celeste was eventually arrested and tried. In court, Celeste claimed she was innocent and tried to discredit Tracy, even accusing her of being mentally unstable. But phone records revealed that Celeste had been in constant contact with Tracy, contradicting her claims. The overwhelming evidence led to Celeste's conviction. She was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole in 2042. After serving her sentence, Tracy was released in 2011, still haunted by guilt but receiving support from the community. Celeste, however, continues to deny any wrongdoing, even accusing her own daughters of being responsible for Stephen's death. But Jennifer and Christina remain firm in their belief that their father was a loving man and that Celeste was the one who betrayed them all. Celeste remains in prison, isolated from the world she tried to control. Do you think Celeste deserves to be in prison for the rest of her life? Why or why not? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your opinions on this shocking case.
911. What's going on out there?
Say somebody started burning up. Her, this lady on fire right now.
Do what?
She burnt all up. You gotta see She burnt. Somebody probably set the car on fire or something. I don't know. She just come out of the woods to my house.
This is the haunting story of Adriana Zimmerman, a bright 19-year-old from Pensacola, Florida, whose life took a tragic turn on March the 24th, 2010. But before we get into Adriana Zimmerman's case, there is something you need to know about Tina LaSonia Brown.
What did she do that was so awful that she would die a torturous death like this? That's what we want to know. I have nothing to do with nothing. That's my friend. I'm telling you, that's my friend. I would never hurt her.
Tina, born Tina Coleman in 1970, grew up in a home filled with instability. Her parents, Lily and Willie Coleman, were young and unprepared for the responsibility of raising kids. Tina and her younger brother, Willie Jr., were often left alone or sent to relatives' homes. At just 12 years old, Tina was forced to care for her brother, cook meals, and help him with school. But was it fair to ask a child to raise another? Things only got worse for Tina. Her father, involved in gangs and drugs, became abusive, even attacking her mother. This caused Lily to leave, but she left Tina and her brother in the care of their father, where the abuse continued. When she tried to escape to her grandmother's house, she was rejected. Eventually, Tina found herself in a chaotic home with her father's new wife, who further exploited and mistreated her. As Tina grew older, her life was filled with trauma, addiction, and instability. After a troubled relationship and struggle with drugs, Tina moved to Pensacola, Florida, hoping to rebuild her life. Despite her efforts, she couldn't escape the past. It was during this time that Tina formed a close bond with her neighbors, 27-year-old Heather Lee and 19-year-old Adriana Zimmerman. Now let's shift our focus to Adriana Zimmerman and how her life at a mobile home park in Pensacola, Escambia County, shaped her circumstances. Born on April 13, 1990, Adriana was just 19 years old at the time of her untimely death. She was a young mother raising two small children, 3-year-old David and 2-year-old Trinity. Her life, though filled with love for her kids, was anything but easy. As a single mother, Adriana faced immense financial struggles. Raising 2 children on her own required resources she simply didn't have. Partners had proven unreliable, and with no immediate family to lean on, she sought support wherever she could find it. Life in a mobile home park brought her close to her neighbors, forming bonds that offered her some solace in an otherwise challenging world. Her nearest neighbors, 39-year-old Tina Brown, Tina's 16-year-old daughter Brittany Miller, and Heather Lee, a 27-year-old, became a part of Adriana's small social circle. For a young mother trying to keep her head above water, having this network must have seemed like a lifeline. But were these relationships truly as supportive as they appeared? Mobile home parks often become a haven for people navigating instability, whether financial, social, or personal. However, such environments can also foster tensions, as close proximity can magnify disagreements. In this particular park, volatile relationships were common, with minor disputes spiraling into heated arguments and sometimes physical altercations. At first, it seemed like Audriana had found a way to navigate the difficulties of single motherhood by relying on her neighbors. These were the people who were supposed to help her through tough times. But as time passed, tensions began to rise. For Audriana and her neighbors, disagreements were frequent. Arguments over personal matters, accusations of betrayal, and even police interventions became part of their interactions. But what could have triggered such a shift in their relationships? Why did their friendship, or what seemed to be a friendship, suddenly become a battleground? The truth is, living so close to one another in such a confined space breeds familiarity. And with that familiarity comes the possibility of both strong bonds and explosive disagreements. Minor squabbles escalated into physical altercations, and in an environment where stability is hard to come by, it's easy to see how things can spiral out of control. One of the main issues between Audriana and Tina stemmed from a very serious accusation. Audriana believed that Tina had reported her to the Florida Department of Children and Families, claiming that Audriana wasn't taking proper care of her children. For any mother, this would have been devastating. And for Audriana, it felt like a betrayal from someone she thought she could trust. How would you feel if someone you considered a friend put your family at risk? Would you confront them or try to walk away? Imagine the fear of losing your children, of having authorities question your ability to care for them. How could a situation like this not destabilize everything she had worked so hard for? But it didn't end there. Audriana also accused Tina of having her boyfriend arrested, further fueling the conflict between them. How do you rebuild trust when someone you believe is a friend has essentially betrayed you? Could this betrayal, real or perceived, have led to such an explosive situation? On top of that, Anna had slashed her car tires. Was this the final straw that broke the camel's back? Or was there solved their differences? Or was the damage already done by the time these arguments turned violent? The environment they lived in didn't help. When financial hardships and unstable personal histories collide, it creates a pressure cooker effect where even minor disputes can escalate. Unfortunately, that's exactly what happened in this case. The relationships between Audriana, Tina, Brittany, and Heather were anything but stable. It's important to note that these neighbors had not known each other for relationships were fragile from the start, and grievances piled up quickly. Without a strong bond to hold them together, resentment took root, and their arguments became increasingly intense. Arguments that began as petty squabbles often turned physical, leading to interventions by the police. Seemed to consume their interactions entirely. But why were they unable to resolve their conflicts peacefully? Was it the absence of trust, or something darker that lingered beneath the surface? As tensions escalated, it became clear that this group of neighbors was trapped in a cycle of mistrust and hostility. Their volatile relationships were a ticking time bomb, with each new argument adding fuel to the fire. Audriana's situation was further complicated by her vulnerability as a young mother revolved around something deeply personal: Brittany's boyfriend. At just 16 years old, Brittany had reportedly discovered that Audriana, who was 19 at the time, had allegedly been involved with her boyfriend. Whether true or not, such a revelation would understandably upset anyone, let alone a teenager still learning to navigate the intensity of emotions and In response to the attack, Audriana used a stun gun, a high-level and extreme reaction to defend herself. The presence of a stun gun in their environment alone suggested deeper dysfunction within their community, and this moment revealed just how volatile things had become. After the incident, Brittany's mother, Tina Brown, learned about the altercation. Hearing that her daughter had been tasered enraged her. It's natural for any parent to be furious when their child is harmed, but instead of taking the situation to the authorities, Tina decided to
Tina, yes, I know Tina. All of us know each other out here. I met her when she first moved out here.
Okay, how long has she been here?
I'm not quite sure. It's been a couple months, though. She ain't been living out here no longer than a year.
Okay, where did you go tonight before we got here?
Tonight? Tonight?
Yeah.
I didn't go anyway.
Despite the recurring conflicts, Audriana and Brittany remained intertwined in each other's lives, with a mix of shared history and unresolved tension fueling the chaos. The idea of making peace must have seemed like a glimmer of hope. Unbeknownst to Audriana, the invitation was a trap. Inside the trailer, Tina, Brittany, Heather, and another girl, Mallory, who was only 13 years old, had already devised a sinister plan. Before Audriana arrived, Heather had explained how to use a stun gun effectively. Brittany had even told Mallory that they were fixing to kill Audriana, a chilling admission of premeditation. Despite any perceived faults or actions on Audriana's part, nothing could justify what was about to unfold. The group had deliberated, planned, and ultimately chosen to carry ability. Tina had even hidden a stun gun in a cabinet, signaling just how premeditated their plan was. Brittany had made it clear to Mallory, if she revealed what was about to happen, she would face the same fate. The stage was set for something unimaginable. Audriana arrived around 9 p.m., completely unaware of the danger. Within minutes, the horrifying reality unfolded. Tina used the stun gun on Audriana, shocking her repeatedly. The pain, fear, and helplessness must have been overwhelming. Imagine the surge of electricity, the Begging for help, Tina dragged her into the bathroom. Brittany punched her in the face, adding to her agony. To silence her cries, Heather shoved a sock into her mouth. It wasn't just physical pain. It was psychological torment. Every second was a new layer of horror. But the nightmare didn't end there. The group forced Audriana into the trunk of Tina's car. Can you imagine the horror of being locked in a confined, dark space, knowing you're being taken somewhere far worse? For Audriana, a young mother, it was dark, silent, and eerie. Silent and eerie. Audriana tried to run. It was a desperate, instinctive act of survival. But the odds were against her. The rough terrain, the darkness, and her weakened state caused her to trip. The attackers caught her again, dragging her back into their grasp. What followed was brutal beyond comprehension. Tina and Brittany took turns attacking Audriana. Tina wielded the stun gun while Brittany used a crowbar, each inflicting unimaginable pain. The weapons were deadly, and the weapons were deadly, and at the weapons. She used her fists, punching Audriana repeatedly. It was personal for her. She seemed to relish the physical connection, as if each blow was fueled by twisted satisfaction. By now, Audriana was severely injured, lying helpless on the ground. But Tina and Brittany weren't done. Tina walked to her car and retrieved a can of gasoline. She poured it over Audriana's battered body. Then, with a lighter in hand, she set her on fire. What kind of person can set another human being on fire? How can anyone ignore the screams of pain and terror? Audriana screamed as flames engulfed her. Screamed as flames engulfed her. Audriana was still conscious when they set her alight. Face down on the ground, she fought through the pain, her survival instincts kicking in. Despite her injuries, she managed to roll and extinguish the flames enough to crawl to a nearby home for help. Her attackers, meanwhile, fled the scene. On their way back, Brittany realized she had left behind some critical items, including the stun gun and her shoes. Tina, however, refused to turn back. She wanted to put as much distance as possible. Significant. But they were wrong. Now, miraculously, despite enduring life-threatening injuries, Audriana Zimmerman managed to summon the strength to walk nearly a third of a mile. Her destination was a nearby house belonging to a man named Terrence Hendrick. In the quiet darkness of that night, Terrence initially heard faint cries for help. So soft, help. So soft. It became horrifyingly clear that she was gravely injured. Terrence immediately called for help, staying with her on his porch until emergency responders arrived.
911. What's going on out there? Try to see somebody outside. Try to see somebody outside. She burnt, so like somebody probably set the car on fire or something. I don't know. She just come out of the woods at my house.
She sat on the steps, rocking back and forth in an attempt to comfort herself. Technicians arrived. They were shocked at the extent of her injuries. Her burns were so severe that her skin was peeling away at the slightest touch. The EMTs worked as best they could, treating her burns with gauze and oxygen. But her wounds were so an unthinkable resilience. Through unimaginable agony, she spoke. She told the EMTs exactly what had happened, how she'd been tasered, beaten with a crowbar, set on fire, and left for dead. She named every attacker and even provided their addresses. But the most devastating detail? She called them her friends. Despite their monstrous betrayal, she referred to them as people she once trusted. It's clear she believed in reconciliation, that broken friendships could be repaired. That belief, tragically, to Sacred Heart Hospital, where doctors placed her in a medically induced coma. It wasn't just her resilience that stood out. It was her unwavering courage and selflessness. Investigators arrived quickly, determined Adriana had sought help after escaping her attackers. They followed a dirt path leading to a wooded area. As they walked, it didn't take long for them to discover signs of a brutal crime. In the clearing, they found disturbing evidence: a pair of white shoes, a strand of hair, a strand of hair. Among the debris, they discovered a burnt bra, likely belonging to Adriana. It was clear to the investigators that this area held crucial evidence. Each of these items was a vital clue, painting a gruesome picture of what had happened. The investigation was moving fast, and investigators knew they were on the right track. Back at Tina, they focused their attention on the people who had been closest to Adriana. Tina Brown, Heather Lee, and Brittany Miller were all questioned about their involvement. Tina was the first to be interrogated. When she was brought in for questioning, she claimed to have no knowledge of what had happened to Adriana. She insisted she had been at home watching movies that night with Heather. Tina explained that while there had been some arguments between her and Adriana in the past, they had reconciled recently. Insistent on explaining their bond and offering unnecessary details about how good friends she and Adriana were. Could this defensive behavior be a sign of guilt? Well, Tina spoke in an almost defensive tone, repeating that she and Adriana had been close friends and had patched up their differences. But the more she insisted, the more suspicious it seemed. When people tell it felt as though Tina was trying too hard to prove her innocence. As the investigation continued, a significant discovery was made. The hair weave Tina had been wearing during the interview was found to match a strand of hair discovered at the crime scene. This evidence placed Tina at the location of the attack, despite her at home that night and had no knowledge of what had transpired. She stated that Tina had visited her briefly, but then left to return to her own home. However, when Tina returned, Heather noticed her acting strangely, pointing toward the window and mentioning the arrival of the police. While Tina and Heather stuck to their stories, there was one key individual the police had not yet questioned: Brittany Miller. When Brittany was interviewed the next day, her demeanor raised alarms. She spoke in an unnervingly calm and detached manner, as if she were discussing a trip to the grocery store rather than a violent crime. She showed no remorse, no fear, and no anxiety. It was almost as though she had no connection to the brutal events that had unfolded. Despite the mounting evidence, Tina's vehicle for forensic analysis, and inside they found even more evidence linking the suspects to the crime. Drops of Adriana's blood were found in the car, along with DNA on the crowbar, the stun gun, and the shoes. But was this enough to finally seal their gave the officers an opportunity to observe their behavior, knowing that people sometimes make mistakes or reveal new details when they think they're out of danger. Then something crucial happened. Tina called a friend, Palomi, and told her about what had been done to Adriana. She mentioned that enough to finish the job. Tina asked Palomi if she could finish what they had started. Why would she say this? Was she trying to ensure Audriana didn't survive to testify? Palomi, realizing the gravity of the situation, contacted the authorities, providing them with Brittany and Heather were taken into custody. The forensic evidence, including blood on Tina's car and the crowbar, confirmed their involvement in the horrific crime. There were also numerous blunt force injuries, and a severe laceration on her skull had caused internal bleeding. The only part of her body that wasn't affected was her right ankle and calf. These findings painted a tragic picture of the young woman's events that had led to Audriana Zimmerman's tragic death. Finally, in 2011, Heather made a deal with the authorities. She pleaded guilty to a second-degree felony and agreed to testify against Tina Brown and Brittany Miller to avoid a harsher punishment. During her interrogation, Heatherly broke down in tears, claiming she had always treated Audriana well and was concerned for her well-being. She explained that their original intent was merely to teach Audriana a lesson, but things spiraled. In June 2012, the truth began to unravel. Witnesses, including Tina's own cellmate and another girl named Mallory, who was there during the attack, testified against her. Mallory revealed that she had been terrified to speak out, fearing she could face the same. The jury found Tina guilty of first-degree murder and recommended the death penalty, citing the brutal nature of the crime. She later apologized to Audriana's family, but admitted to her role in the tragic death. As for Brittany Miller, she was under 18 at the time, so she couldn't face the death penalty. Instead, she was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of a review after 15 years. Now, what do you think drove the people closest to Audriana Zimmerman to betray her in such a horrific way? Do you believe? On June 19, 2019, a 911 dispatcher received a call from a church employee reporting a tip about a body discovered in a remote location.
I work at the Rising Church in Old Town, Arvada. I have a person who's reporting a crime that was reported to him firsthand, and there's a vehicle that potentially has a body in it. The person who committed this crime is Frank Moffat.
In the background, a voice could be heard guiding the caller on what to say.
Okay, does he have any further information?
It's definitely not a hoax. It's not my own brother.
Police promptly responded to the call to investigate the report.
She said that there was a man in the church and that he wanted to report a crime. Essentially, the crime was that his brother had killed his girlfriend and placed her into the trunk of a vehicle near his home. As soon as we heard we possibly have a body in our car, we're thinking, we have a homicide. We need to treat this as a homicide.
The call included a serious allegation, naming a suspect who lived near the vehicle. Upon arriving at the provided address, police discovered a white Ford Escort. The vehicle was abandoned, had been unregistered for 2 years, and was filled with trash. When questioned by police, neighbors mentioned they believed the visible limbs inside the abandoned car were part of a mannequin.
I'm pretty sure. I mean, we both feel confident, and we pray that that's what we saw. Is it that white car?
There was a distinct odor of rotting, of death. Every police officer knows the smell of death. There was a female body in the car. Her head was down near the floorboard. Her feet were almost up on the seat. My initial response is, we need to get our CSIs out. We need to get the lab out. We were concerned with the rising temperatures that we would start to lose physical evidence, DNA, off of the body.
The police needed to examine the body hidden beneath the piles of garbage bags.
Upon death, the body continues to change as it decays. So we ultimately sealed the car and then had it towed with the body in it back to the police station.
The pressing question was, how did the body end up in the car? Their only lead was the man named in the 911 call, Frank Moffitt, who lived just around the corner from where the car was found. The police decided to move in on him.
Havana PD, make yourself known, exit the residence with your hands up. Havana PD. Havana PD, exit the residence.
Frank Moffitt was promptly arrested and taken into custody for questioning.
Face the other way. Back up towards me until I tell you to stop.
He basically said that he had nothing to do with the homicide, had no idea how she ended up inside this vehicle that he was using at the time.
The police immediately began searching for evidence in and around Frank's house. They also canvassed the area, searching for any available surveillance footage.
We need to knock on every single door and get as much footage as we possibly could. Everybody has cameras these days.
There you go. Bingo.
There, you got both angles.
Okay, that's perfect.
Meanwhile, the crime scene investigation team began their meticulous work on the white car.
This was not just a female placed in the back of an empty vehicle. The car had a rolled up rug, it had trash bags, it had car batteries. It was packed full of stuff. Each item had to meticulously be taken out of the car. We processed some of the items for DNA. It was a very lengthy, slow process.
Detective Matt Archuleta carefully examined the evidence inside the car, as well as the body, to determine the cause of death.
There was a small trickle of like a bloody substance coming out of one of the eye sockets. And it had a downward shape to it in the sense that it had run down the nose and then dried. Following gravity, that would indicate the head was in an upright position when that drop came out. It was fairly obvious that the death had occurred somewhere else, that the body was put into the car by someone, and then that the body was covered with trash to hide the body.
After removing the body from the car, the police used a fingerprint scanner to identify the victim. The victim was identified as Veronica Serenana. But what happened to her? Who could have possibly wanted her dead? And what clues were found that brought everything to light? Well, stay with us as we unravel the chilling events, the secrets, and the heartbreaking reality behind Veronica Serenana's final days. On June 19, 2019, Veronica Ann Serenana, a devoted mother, daughter, sister, and aunt, was taken from this world at just 38 years old. But who was she beyond this heartbreaking end? And what led to this heartbreaking loss? Veronica's family and friends remember her as a beautiful soul with a contagious smile and a laugh that filled the room. She was passionate about hiking, reading, and yoga, finding peace in nature and joy in simple moments. How could someone so full of life meet such a tragic fate? Born on August 30th, 1980, in Kremling, Colorado, Veronica was deeply loved by those around her. Her children, Emilio and Andrew Gutierrez, and her parents, Pedro and Sadie, mourn her absence every day. She also leaves behind siblings who remember her warmth and kindness, her sparkling eyes that lit up any space she entered. How does a family recover from losing someone so cherished? Despite the love that surrounded her, Veronica's life ended amid a conflict that brought unimaginable sorrow to all who knew her. Was this tragedy preventable? And how did the feud between two brothers lead to a loss that no family should have to endure? So, one of the two brothers, Christopher Moffitt, was in a relationship with Veronica Serenana, a bond that should have been safe and full of trust. But for Veronica, it was anything but safe. For 4 turbulent years, their relationship swung between brief moments of calm and terrifying bursts of violence. How could something that seemed like love become so twisted? Christopher viewed their relationship as a beautiful love story, but was it really? For Veronica, it was far from a storybook romance. The good times were always overshadowed by Chris's brutal outbursts, turning their lives into a nightmare cycle of control and fear. In January 2019, only 5 months before Veronica's tragic end, police were called in after one of Chris's violent attacks. He'd been arrested for assaulting her, but Veronica's story went beyond just one incident. She told investigators that he'd hurt her more than 100 times throughout their relationship. Can you imagine the pain and fear she lived with daily? The most horrifying part? Chris had a common method of hurting her. He would pin her down, cover her mouth and nose with his hand, and leave her unable to breathe. This wasn't just a moment of rage, it was a pattern of terrifying control. The first time he strangled her, she lost consciousness, and yet she found herself caught in a cycle, unable to break free. Despite the serious nature of the charges, something unexpected happened. In January, Chris was arrested, but by April, the assault charge was dismissed. Why was this charge dismissed? And what did this mean for Veronica? Without the weight of those charges, Chris walked free. But his anger hadn't faded. Just a day after his release, he assaulted her again. This time, he pled guilty to felony assault, receiving a sentence of 3 years probation. It was then that Veronica was granted a protection order, a fragile barrier between her and the man who continued to haunt her life. But even a protection order couldn't keep him away. Chris soon found himself back in jail, this time for a drug charge. But when he was released on June 12th, he reached out to Veronica again, ignoring the protection order entirely. He had nowhere else to go, and somehow Veronica, compassionate as she was, didn't turn him away. She chose to help him, despite everything, despite the warnings, and despite the protection order. What would make her do this? Veronica booked a series of hotel rooms for Chris around Denver, allowing him a place to stay even as her own safety was compromised. It's chilling to think about, isn't it? Here was a woman who, despite all that she'd endured, showed kindness to the man who'd caused her such fear and pain. But Veronica's generosity, sadly, came at a terrible cost. On June 17th, hotel security footage captured Veronica alive for one of the last times. She was seen paying for Chris's room while he passed by dressed in a white-collared shirt and a gray t-shirt that bore the unsettling words, "Serial Tillers," on the back. The very next day, June 18th, Veronica went to visit Chris again. This time, they planned a casual outing. They picked up Chinese food and a 6-pack of beer, hoping for a quiet picnic by scenic Lake Dillon. But this outing wasn't the lighthearted escape it seemed. Instead, a dark cloud was already looming over them, even if Veronica hadn't fully realized it yet. In Chris's mind, paranoia and jealousy were brewing. He had a suspicion, a devastating suspicion, that Veronica and his brother had been together while he was in jail. This idea hurt and angered him deeply, feeding his resentment. He wanted Veronica all to himself, with no one else in her life. And on that day, he tried to persuade her to leave it all behind, to run away with him and start fresh somewhere far away. But Veronica had already given him so many chances. She wasn't willing to throw everything away and run. And that refusal was enough to make Chris snap. His temper flared, and once again, he lost control. But this time, the consequences were irreversible. In a fit of rage, Chris strangled Veronica. By the time he came to his senses, it was too late. Veronica Serenana, a loving mother and a kind-hearted woman, would never take another breath. The medical examiner later confirmed that she died from manual strangulation. Veronica was only 38 years old when she lost her life. She left behind 2 young sons, children who would now have to grow up without their mother. What would her sons remember of her? Would they remember the love she gave, or would the shadow of her tragic death haunt them forever? It's impossible to fully grasp the heartbreak and suffering Veronica must have endured, not just in her final moments, but throughout the years of her relationship with Chris. What drove her to keep helping him, despite the danger he posed? Why wasn't the justice system able to protect her, even with the protection order in place? Now Chris knew he was in deeper trouble than he had ever been in before. But instead of facing up to what he'd done, he began forming a desperate, almost reckless plan. And what did he come up with? Well, in his mind, he could escape the consequences if he could just convince the police that someone else was responsible. And the person he chose? His own brother, Frank Moffat, who went by Kelly. But why would Chris do this? Well, according to him, Kelly had bullied him for years, ever since they were kids. He painted a picture of constant fighting and bad blood. Chris later told detectives that Kelly had always been the bad guy in his life, often beating him up and picking on him. But what he didn't tell them was his true motive. He wanted revenge. This frame-up was his chance to finally get even, to settle some old scores with Kelly and punish him for what he felt was a recent betrayal involving Veronica. Chris then spun a story for the detectives, a story he hoped would make them believe Kelly was the real culprit. He claimed that on the night of June 18th, he'd dropped Veronica off at Kelly's place around midnight. He said he knew that she'd chosen to be with Kelly, and he claimed he was fine with it, even though it stung. According to his story, he reluctantly accepted her decision. But was that true? Nope. To make things even more convincing, text messages were sent from Veronica's phone to Kelly's that night. The police later hinted that Chris himself may have sent those texts to make it look like Veronica had plans with Kelly. Around 1:30 a.m. on June 19th, a security camera recorded Chris walking near Kelly's house. But here's the question. Why was he there, alone, in the middle of the night? And where was Veronica? Kelly lived in Arvada, a quiet suburb about 12 miles from Denver. In the early hours of that morning, Chris decided to return to Kelly's home. But why go back? What was he planning to do? This time, he was there to plant more evidence. Security footage shows Chris placing Veronica's purse on the dog gate right by Kelly's front door. Kelly and his housemates found the purse the next morning. Imagine their surprise. Veronica's purse was just sitting there, but they didn't know that something far more disturbing was close by. What they couldn't see was that Veronica's body was actually hidden in Kelly's old, beat-up car parked nearby, a car already loaded with trash. They had no idea this simple purse was part of a much larger setup. And what did Chris do next? To take his scheme a step further, he made an anonymous 911 call claiming there had been some suspicious activity and a possible disturbance at Kelly's house the night before. But he wasn't done yet. Just 20 minutes after that, another call came in to 911. This time it was from a church nearby, where an employee reported that a man matching Chris's description had walked in and started making shocking claims. He told them that his brother Kelly had killed his girlfriend and that her body was hidden in Kelly's car. The police took these calls seriously. They quickly descended on Kelly's house, determined to find this vehicle and the evidence inside. What did they find? A white Ford Escort parked not too far from Kelly's house, and in the back seat, hidden under garbage bags and a rolled-up carpet, they found Veronica's body. Now, why would Kelly have loaded this car with trash? Kelly later told police he had filled the car with garbage because he knew it was about to be towed. This detail alone added to the mystery. Could Chris have known this and used it to his advantage? Was it part of his calculated plan to pin everything on Kelly? Armed with the damning calls and the horrifying scene they just uncovered, police moved in to arrest Kelly. This wasn't a simple knock on the door. Given the severity of the accusations and the corpse in his car, they treated him as a dangerous suspect. First, officers used flashbang grenades to get his attention, making sure he knew they were serious. They then commanded him, loudly and forcefully, to come out of the house. Kelly was arrested, and for a while it seemed like Chris's story might hold up. But could he really get away with something this twisted? How long could his web of lies last? Well, while Chris's brother was getting questioned by the police for a murder he didn't commit, Chris himself was far from sitting still. Instead, he used this time to lay out more of his plan, making it look like his brother was the one responsible. But how exactly did he try to pull this off? And just how far was he willing to go to make it look like he was innocent? Chris got to work on building his alibi and creating a smokescreen to divert attention away from himself. He drove around to different places, libraries, public spots, even a casino, leaving messages for Veronica, who by then was already dead. What was he saying in these messages? He sent emails pretending to beg her to run away with him. Why? Because he wanted to give the impression that he thought she was still alive, as if she might just be off hiding somewhere. Adding another layer to his story, Chris didn't own a phone. This forced him to stop at various places to make calls, using different public phones to contact people, always from somewhere new. He even explained his movements to the police when they interviewed him, detailing where he'd been and what he'd done. But this was all just a performance to make himself look innocent. Then detectives uncovered a voicemail Chris had left for Veronica, another piece in his tangled web of deception. In this voicemail, he painted a picture that he still cared for her, as if he was genuinely concerned about her whereabouts. But with Veronica's death confirmed, these voicemails only deepened the mystery. Why go to all this trouble if he had nothing to hide? When asked why he was driving Veronica's car, Chris came up with another story, claiming that she felt guilty for supposedly betraying him by getting close to his brother. According to him, she wanted to make things right, so she handed her car over to him so he could leave town. But his story didn't add up. If he planned to leave on his own, why did he need her car? And if Veronica wasn't going with him, what was the point? Chris then told police he had agreed to pay Veronica $2,000 for the car. He said that when he had the money, he'd send it to her and she'd mail him the car's title. But this didn't quite make sense either. Why would someone who intended to stay close to someone they supposedly loved prepare to leave town with their car? Pressed to explain further, Chris claimed he'd last seen Veronica when he drove her to his brother's house late one night, dropping her off around midnight. After that, he said he drove out to the mouth of Black Rock Canyon, where he slept in the car. But what was he doing there alone? And why didn't Veronica go with him? Something didn't feel right. Then detectives hit him with the real news. Veronica was the victim of a murder investigation. Chris's reaction was to fake surprise. His story continued to unravel as detectives dug deeper into his whereabouts and actions. A massive hole in Chris's plan came to light through security footage that showed him around his brother Kelly's house on the night Veronica died. Chris had insisted he'd left Veronica at Kelly's house that evening, but the cameras showed otherwise. Kelly was inside his house all night and didn't leave, meaning he couldn't have been involved in any crime outside. Not only that, but Veronica was nowhere to be seen in the footage. The implication was clear. Chris's story didn't match up with reality. But why would he try so hard to frame his own brother? Kelly, now fully aware of Chris's intentions, told detectives that he believed Chris was trying to set him up. He suspected it was all because of Veronica and the complicated relationships between the three of them. Kelly even admitted to having been with Veronica once in April, adding another layer to the twisted triangle. But when he proved he had a solid alibi for the night in question, police were quick to clear him. This left Chris as the prime suspect. It wasn't exactly a leap given his history. There were multiple domestic violence charges on his record, all involving Veronica. He tried to present himself as trustworthy and honest with the detectives, but with so much stacking up against him, the detectives weren't buying it. On June 19th, the same day Veronica's body was discovered, police tracked Chris down in Glenwood Springs. He was sitting in Veronica's car, parked in a Walmart parking lot. This was a red flag in itself. Veronica was already missing, yet he had her vehicle. Police arrested him for violating a restraining order and booked him into the Garfield County Jail. Here, two detectives from the Arvada Police Department paid him a visit early the next morning, eager to ask him about the final hours he'd spent with Veronica. The topic of his brother Kelly came up repeatedly in their conversation. As the detectives questioned him, Chris repeatedly denied having anything to do with Veronica's death. But his explanations were flimsy at best. He even went so far as to label her as a stalker, claiming she had been obsessed with him. Why would he suddenly turn the story around like this? The truth is, Chris's stories had more holes than solid ground, and the detectives could see through them. Despite his insistence that he was innocent, everything, from the security footage to his inconsistent statements, pointed in one direction. It all came back to him, to the tangled mess he'd created to cover his tracks. As the detectives gathered more evidence, it became clear that this was not a case of a simple misunderstanding or a tragic accident. It was far more complex, layered with deception, manipulation, and betrayal. With each step Chris took to try to cover his tracks, he only made it easier for the truth to come to light. And in the end, his actions told the story louder than his words ever could. So was it worth it? Did Chris think he could actually get away with it? These are the questions that linger, casting a dark shadow over the tragic story of Veronica Serenana's final days. Now, Chris Moffat, then 36, told investigators that the tension with his older brother Kelly wasn't new. It had been simmering for years, even decades. In fact, the hostility went back to their childhood, long before Veronica Serenana, the woman Chris was eventually convicted of killing, entered the picture. This bad blood between the brothers set the stage for a tragic outcome. But how did it get to the point of murder? After Chris was arrested and in jail, something unexpected happened. His younger brother, Kenny, arranged a video visit. Imagine Chris's surprise. He hadn't even checked the visitor log and had no idea his little brother wanted to see him. Despite the bitterness he harbored toward Kelly, the tension with Kenny was clearly different. Chris seemed genuinely moved to see his younger sibling, thrilled by the effort Kenny made to reach out while he was behind bars. During their conversation, Chris didn't dive into the details of his case. He told Kenny he couldn't talk about it because it was still unresolved. Kenny seemed to understand, not pressing him for information. Instead, they focused on other things, including one of Chris's deepest concerns, his young daughter from a previous relationship. Chris begged Kenny to stay involved in her life, urging him to make sure she didn't lose her connection to the Moffat family. It was a rare moment of vulnerability, and Kenny reassured his brother, promising to do whatever he could to help. But what does this tell us about Chris's mindset? Was he already facing the reality that he might not be around to raise his daughter? The brothers began regular video calls, giving glimpses into Chris's life in jail. But what is life really like for someone facing such serious charges? For Chris, it was a daily reminder of the decisions he had made as he lived out his days in confinement, speaking with Kenny through a screen. Then, the day before Thanksgiving, Chris had another emotional interaction. His father joined in on a video call with him and Kenny. In a moment that pulled at the heartstrings, father and son reconnected, sharing a bittersweet holiday visit. For Chris, it was a chance to feel connected to his family, despite the charges hanging over him. But did this reunion bring any peace, or did it only deepen the sense of loss and regret? Chris's plan to frame his older brother Kelly was ultimately unsuccessful. Investigators found holes in his story, and the evidence didn't line up with his accusations. Security cameras contradicted his account, and lab results sealed his fate. DNA evidence found on Veronica's body, specifically on her hands and neck, matched Chris, not Kelly. Meanwhile, Kelly's DNA was nowhere to be found. The truth of what happened to Veronica started to come into focus, and Chris's attempt to deflect responsibility was exposed. But what was going through his mind as this evidence piled up against him? Did he believe he could actually get away with blaming his brother? The autopsy report further confirmed the tragedy of Veronica's final moments. It revealed that she had suffered extensive bruising and abrasions on her lips, eyes, throat, neck, and shoulders. The cause of death was determined to be manual strangulation, a brutal and personal act that left no doubt about the violence involved. For investigators, this reinforced the picture of a troubled relationship, marked by abuse and escalating hostility. In 2021, Chris finally admitted his guilt. He entered a plea deal, pleading guilty to second-degree murder and accepting the charges against him. This agreement allowed him to avoid a first-degree murder conviction and an additional charge of tampering with physical evidence. Yet it still led to a significant sentence. Jefferson County Judge Diego Hunt handed down a 40-year prison sentence for the murder, with an additional 15 years for tampering with a deceased human body. Chris also faced 8 years of parole once his sentence is completed. But was this justice served, or could there have been a different way forward? The story of Chris Moffat is a disturbing look into how unresolved family conflicts can spiral into tragedy. It's a case that raises so many questions. What could have been done to prevent this? How did the dynamics within the Moffat family set Chris on this path? And what are the lasting impacts on those left behind? Veronica Serenana's memory serves as a grim reminder of the dangers of domestic violence and the lives it can claim. For her family and friends, justice may have been served, but it can never replace the loss they endured. Meanwhile, the Moffat family is left with fractured ties and painful memories. The case forces us to confront the darker aspects of human nature and the irreversible consequences of choices made in anger and resentment. Now, how do you feel about the justice served in this case? Let us know in the comments below, and do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more.
3 people are dead, including a 10-year-old boy, and state police are calling their deaths a homicide. Investigators say a relative found the bodies last night in a mobile home on Route 1 in the town of Amity, just south of Holton, and they still don't know who did it. As News 8's Keith Baldy reports, this certainly has shaken everyone.
Quite scared, to tell you the truth, and this is really, you know, for something like this to happen in a small town like this, you just can't believe it.
We all think we know what makes a small town safe: friendly neighbors, quiet streets, and a sense of trust. But what if that safety is just an illusion? In June 2010, Amity, Maine, a town where violent crimes were unheard of, was shaken by a tragedy that would change it forever. But what happened on that fateful day? Who was behind it, and why? Was it truly a random act, or was there more to the story? Well, stay with us till the end as we uncover the chilling events and their aftermath. This is the story of Thane Ormsby. But before we get into Thane Ormsby's case, there is something you need to know about Amity, Maine. This is not your bustling city or even a lively small town. Amity is a tiny, quiet community nestled on the U.S.-Canadian border in New England. With a population of just 253 as of 2020, calling it a town feels like a stretch. It's more like a hamlet. Imagine a place so remote that it has no restaurants, no hotels, and no attractions to speak of. In fact, its most notable landmarks are its 2 small cemeteries. Could such a peaceful and isolated place ever be the setting for something so dark and unimaginable? Now, Thane Ormsby wasn't a native of Amity. He was a 20-year-old drifter who had been taken in by Robert Strout and his wife Joy, a kind-hearted couple trying to help him get back on his feet. But was Ormsby grateful? Did he appreciate their generosity? The answer, as you'll soon discover, is unsettling. Things started to unravel when Ormsby's behavior became increasingly erratic. He was charming, yes, but also manipulative, traits that allowed him to take and take until the Strouts finally had to say no. But why did this simple boundary trigger something so extreme? What made him cross a line that would forever change the lives of everyone involved? In June 2010, a brutal triple homicide rocked this small, unsuspecting community. Jeffrey Ryan, his 10-year-old son Jesse, and their family friend Jason DeHaan were found brutally murdered in Ryan's mobile home. This wasn't just a crime, it was a nightmare straight out of a Stephen King novel. How could such violence occur in a town where everyone knows each other? Now let's rewind a bit and take a closer look at the early life of Thane Ormsby, a man whose early years seem full of contradictions. Born on May 22, 1992, to Maria Ormsby, Thane grew up in a troubled environment. By many accounts, he seemed like an ordinary kid, even excelling in some areas. While his childhood has often been described as difficult, many who knew him also described him as a good guy, though what that really means is up for debate. Thane's life was a complex mix of achievements, struggles, and missed opportunities, painting a picture of someone who might have taken a very different path under other circumstances. Thane grew up in Ellsworth, Maine, a town about 2 hours and 40 minutes from Amity. During his time at Ellsworth High School, he was involved in both the wrestling and cross-country track teams, showing his physical strength and dedication to fitness. He was even an honor student, showcasing academic excellence. But despite these achievements, he didn't fit the mold of a typical success story. Isn't it strange how someone can seem to have everything going for them, yet still feel out of place? While he was recognized for his strength and determination in sports, his classmates described him as rough at times. Some noted his immense physical power, but nothing about his behavior stood out as particularly alarming. So what went wrong? Thane's struggles can be traced back to his early years. According to reports, he suffered from physical and emotional neglect as a child. At the age of 12, he was removed from his mother's care, an event that seemed to mark a turning point in his life. Afterward, he lived with his uncle for a time, but the lack of consistent support and guidance left its mark. According to a psychiatrist, Thane's early experiences likely shaped his later actions, and it's possible that intervention at an earlier stage might have changed his trajectory. Despite his early promise, Thane never graduated high school. Instead, he began drifting through life, a young man with no clear direction. Despite the challenges, there were people in Thane's life who tried to help. Interestingly, Thane crossed paths with John Frary, a political candidate in Maine. Frary, who was running for Congress in 2008, took Thane under his wing, providing him shelter and small amounts of money in exchange for campaign work. Frary saw potential in the young man and even encouraged him to consider joining the Marines. Could military discipline have given Thane the structure he so desperately needed? We'll never know. Thane rejected the idea, and their relationship soured over a trivial argument about a washing machine. After leaving Frary's care, Thane moved in with a local reverend, another individual who tried to guide him. But once again, this arrangement didn't last. Despite the efforts of various people, a politician, a clergyman, and even family, Thane seemed unreachable. Some people, no matter how much help they receive, remain on a troubled path. But why was Thane's case so different? Was it his inner turmoil, or was there something else at play? By 2010, at just 20 years old, Thane's journey brought him to Amity, Maine, a remote and quiet place far removed from his previous life. Here he lived with the Strout family, Robert and Joy, on their secluded property. In exchange for room and board, Thane helped with cooking, cleaning, and tending to the family's birds. Perhaps he sought solace in the simplicity of rural life, or maybe he was simply running from his past. But did he find what he was looking for? Unfortunately, this chapter of his life would only deepen the shadows. 4 miles away from the Strout property lived Jeffrey Ryan, his 10-year-old son Jesse, and family friend Jason DeHaan. In this sparsely populated area, 4 miles was considered next door. The Ryan family story intersected with Thane's in ways that no one could have foreseen. But how did their paths cross, and why would their lives end in tragedy? Well, Jeffrey Ryan had once been married to Tamara Strout, the daughter of Robert and Joy Strout. The two shared a teenage daughter, Mariah, but their relationship had been far from amicable. After their divorce, tensions lingered. Jeffrey had also fathered Jesse with another woman, adding another layer of complexity to his life. These relationships created a web of connections and unresolved conflicts. Could these dynamics have played a role in the events that followed? Thane's presence in Amity was quiet at first. He went about his duties with the Strout family, but something seemed to simmer beneath the surface. What was he seeking in this remote corner of Maine? Was it peace, redemption, or something darker? The answers remain elusive, but one thing is clear. The tranquility of this rural town would soon be shattered. In the weeks leading up to the tragedy, Thane's interactions with the Strout and Ryan families painted a picture of a young man caught between conflicting emotions. While he was described as likable and even charming, there were moments of tension and unease. But did anyone notice the warning signs? Or was the storm that was about to break completely unforeseen? And then in June 2010, everything went horribly wrong. It was in this remote and quiet part of Maine that the lives of Jeffrey Ryan, his son Jesse, and family friend Jason DeHaan would be tragically cut short. The details of what happened next are as chilling as they are tragic, leaving behind questions about whether Thane Ormsby's early life could have foreshadowed such a horrifying outcome. Now, it all began when Jake DeHaan, a concerned brother, set out to check on his sibling, Jason DeHaan. Jason hadn't returned home after a visit to his friend Jeffrey Ryan's trailer the day before. With no response to calls, Jake decided to head over to Jeff's place, located at 163 U.S. Route 1. The property appeared deserted. Jeff's Ford F-150 wasn't parked outside, and there was no sign of life. But Jake had no idea the scene he was about to uncover would change everything. So what was Jake expecting to find that day? Perhaps his brother sitting with their friend Jeffrey Ryan, laughing over a drink? Instead, as Jake knocked on the trailer door, he was greeted with silence. Growing uneasy, he grabbed a flashlight and peered through the windows. What he saw inside made him freeze. A scene so horrific it defied belief. Blood. It was everywhere. Yes, the trailer was smeared with blood, and panic set in. Jake quickly called his father, and together they forced their way inside the trailer, only to uncover a nightmare that would haunt them forever. Inside the trailer lay the lifeless body of 10-year-old Jesse Ryan, brutally stabbed to death. Jesse, who had come to Amity to spend Father's Day with his dad, Jeffrey, had seemingly tried to hide in the back room, but the attacker found him. The nightmare continued outside. A search of the property led to the discovery of Jeffrey Ryan's body in a woodshed and Jason DeHaan's body in a ditch. Jason had seemingly tried to escape but was overpowered. All three victims, Jeff, his son Jesse, and Jason, had been stabbed multiple times. Jason's throat had been slashed in a particularly brutal act of violence. What kind of person could carry out such an act? The investigation began immediately, with police noticing tire tracks leading away from the property. Jeffrey's 1989 Ford F-150 was missing, and authorities believed whoever had taken it was the killer. In a town of just over 200 people, could someone have seen or heard anything? The community, known for its quiet and trust, suddenly felt the weight of fear and suspicion. Jason DeHaan, one of the victims, left behind a wife, Crystal, and 3 young children. Jason and Jeffrey had been best friends, often sharing a drink and catching up. On the day of the tragedy, Jason had taken his ATV to visit his parents, but stopped by Jeff's place first. Heartbreakingly, Jason's 9-year-old daughter almost accompanied him that day, a routine she often enjoyed, but for reasons unknown, she stayed behind. It was later seen as a tragic blessing that she wasn't there. As police worked tirelessly to uncover the truth, they found a critical clue: fingerprints on a beer bottle inside the trailer. Whose fingerprints were they? The evidence led straight to Thane Ormsby, a 20-year-old drifter who had recently arrived in Amity. But who was Thane Ormsby, and why would he be connected to such a horrific crime? On June 29th, about a week after the murders, Thane was apprehended and brought in for questioning. Ormsby was initially cooperative with police, calmly claiming he had no involvement in the murders. He admitted he'd been to Jeffrey Ryan's home before, even sharing a beer with him about 2 weeks earlier. He explained away the fingerprints as remnants from that visit, but could his story hold up? Well, the evidence told a different story. Police revealed they had found Ormsby's DNA at the crime scene, a discovery that left no room for doubt. It didn't take long for Thane's confident facade to crumble. When police informed him that his DNA had been found at the crime scene, he knew the game was up. Thane's resistance melted away, and he admitted to his involvement. Calmly, he asked the officers, "How detailed do you want me to be?" When the detective responded, "As much as you can," Thane agreed to walk them through everything. He began his chilling confession with a calm resolve. "I'm already guilty. I might as well start from the beginning. What could have driven someone like Ormsby to commit such brutal acts?" As his confession unfolded, the chilling details painted a picture of calculated violence and a deep lack of remorse. Ormsby described in chilling detail how he arrived at Jeff's trailer with the intent to kill. His motives were unclear, perhaps jealousy, a desire to prove something, or a deep-seated anger. Whatever the reason, the result was the same: a senseless act of violence that claimed 3 lives. In the interrogation room, Thane Ormsby calmly walked the police through the events of that tragic night. As he recounted the brutal murders, his demeanor was strikingly detached. There was no visible remorse or emotion, not even a hint of guilt as he described the horrific acts he had committed. He spoke matter-of-factly about the violence, showing little to no emotional response. Those who knew him previously painted a picture of a strong, athletic young man. He was a member of the cross-country and wrestling teams. One of his teammates even remarked, "He's freaking tough." However, that very toughness was used to carry out an unimaginable act of violence against 2 men and a young child. Ormsby's description of killing the 10-year-old boy, Jesse Ryan, was chilling in its lack of emotion. He explained how Jesse was the first to try to escape, running in fear. Ormsby simply said, "Jesse had been the quickest to go," offering no sign of remorse or sorrow. His matter-of-fact tone continued as he revealed how he chased Jesse down, stating that the child was scared, and that Jesse's fear made him an easy target. There was no reflection or empathy for the child's life being brutally taken. The lack of emotion and detachment in his words left many questioning why he would carry out such a violent act against 3 innocent people. The victims weren't even people Ormsby had known for long, so what could have possibly driven him to commit such a crime? When investigators asked Ormsby why he committed the murders, his answer was unsettling. Thane claimed that he believed Jeffrey Ryan was a well-known local drug dealer involved in the sale of dangerous drugs, including heroin and marijuana. He described Ryan as evil, so evil, in fact, that Ormsby felt he needed to take action. Ormsby stated, "He's got to go. He's got to go," revealing that in his twisted mindset, he thought he was doing something good. He believed that by killing Jeffrey Ryan, he could rid the world of someone who was causing harm to others. Ormsby even went further, saying that he also wanted to kill Robert Strout because he believed Strout was another person who had hurt others. In his mind, this was justified. Thane was convinced that something good would come from taking the lives of these men. His words reflected a warped sense of morality that seemed incomprehensible to those who were investigating the crime. Jeffrey Ryan, a disabled veteran with a back injury who was known for his quiet life, had no criminal background that would point to any involvement in serious offenses. While he did have a prescription for a narcotic painkiller due to his condition, there was never any evidence suggesting he was involved in drug trafficking. Both Jeffrey Ryan and his friend, Jason DeHaan, had minor past infractions. Jeffrey Ryan did have a minor run-in with the law back in 1992 when he was fined $100 for disorderly conduct. His friend Jason DeHaan had a DUI conviction in 2004, which cost him 7 days in jail, a $400 fine, and a year on probation. Neither of these men, however, were involved in anything remotely close to a life of crime, and certainly not to the extent of a drug-dealing network that could justify such an extreme act. Yet Thane Ormsby, despite having no clear motive, claimed otherwise. No evidence was found to support Ormsby's claims about his alleged reasons for the murders, adding to the confusion and mystery surrounding the case. Thane's own background did not paint the picture of a hardened criminal either. But what motivated him to commit such an unimaginable crime? The question still lingers, with no clear answer from Ormsby himself. Thane Ormsby was arrested just 3 days after the murders, following a brutal and honest interrogation. One significant piece of evidence came in the form of Jeffrey Ryan's missing Ford F-150 truck, which was found burnt out in Weston, a 22-minute drive south of Amity. It was clear that whoever set the truck ablaze had made an attempt to destroy any evidence of their involvement. But who did this and why? As the investigation gained momentum and Ormsby became the prime suspect, a flood of tips and information came forward. Witnesses began to step forward with strange observations that added layers to the story. One such witness was the owner of a bar and grill in Dover, New Hampshire, about 4 hours away from Amity. By then, Thane was preparing to leave town and had already begun handing out job applications, seeking a fresh start away from Amity. This raised questions. How did he get from Amity to Weston? And who had picked him up? The investigation revealed more questions than answers, leaving many pieces of the puzzle still missing. Ormsby was living with Robert Strout and his wife, Joy, at the time of the murders. This fact led the police to bring them in for questioning after they identified Ormsby as the main suspect. But why did Robert Strout wait until he was brought in by the authorities to speak up? Why did he not say anything sooner, especially when he knew more about the situation than he initially let on? According to Robert, on the day of the murders, he had been sitting on the porch enjoying a beer when he saw Jeff Ryan's truck pull into the driveway. He noticed the driver was not Jeff, but Thane Ormsby. What Robert witnessed next would change everything. Thane Ormsby stepped out of the truck, covered head to toe in blood. At that moment, Robert knew something was terribly wrong. But did Robert not find this alarming at the time? Or was there more to his reaction? Robert claimed that once Ormsby saw him witnessing the bloody scene, he threatened the entire Strout family, demanding their silence and help. Was Robert truly afraid, or did he feel a sense of loyalty to Thane, who had lived with them for a time? Robert, under duress, followed Ormsby as he drove Jeff's truck to a remote area near Tamara Stout's home in Weston. What could have driven Ormsby to commit such a violent act, and how far would he go to cover up the crime? Robert stated that Ormsby stripped his clothes, cleaned himself, and burned the bloody garments. Robert then followed him as he drove the truck to a secluded field, where he doused it with gasoline and set it ablaze. What was going through Ormsby's mind as he carried out this final step? After the truck was destroyed, Robert and Thane made their way back to Amity, where Thane confidently declared, "It's done." However, Thane was not finished. He still had the murder weapon, a knife. In a last attempt to dispose of it, he allegedly threw the knife into a marsh near the New Hampshire border. As he got rid of the weapon, he made an odd choice. He began distributing job applications in New Hampshire, as if trying to start over and leave his past behind. When Robert was questioned, he revealed that he had been a silent observer to events that seemed beyond belief. He had known more than he had let on before his arrest, leading some to wonder, was he an unwilling participant or a willing accomplice? His reaction to the police's accusations and the detailed accounts he provided pointed to a man who might have been coerced into helping Ormsby cover up the murders. Robert's story hinted at deeper motivations, including a personal grudge against Jeff Ryan. Robert had a strained relationship with Jeff, having once been married to Jeff's daughter. Did that animosity contribute to his reluctance to come forward, or did it play a role in the events that unfolded that night? Melanie, Jeff's daughter, recalled how Robert appeared on the news, speaking about how great Jeff had been and what a devoted father he was. But what Melanie found unsettling was that during this very interview, Robert already knew the truth. He knew who had killed Jeff, his son Jesse, and Jason. Why did he choose that moment to act as if he knew nothing about the murder, even as he spoke publicly about the victims' qualities and their loss? Was he trying to protect himself, or was there more to his involvement than met the eye? When the case of Thane Ormsby hit the headlines, the entire town of Amity was stunned. How did a place known for its tranquility come to be at the center of such a disturbing event? Even now, years later, questions still linger. Was Ormsby acting alone, or did others have a part in the crimes? Jason DeHaan, Jason's brother, discovered the murder scene and has always believed that Thane Ormsby did not act alone. During interviews, he mentioned that it seemed impossible for Thane, a young, skinny man, to have overpowered his much larger and stronger brother. Jason's suspicion raised questions about whether someone else had assisted Thane in carrying out the murders. The connections between Thane, Robert Strout, and the Ryan family added weight to these theories. Could it be that Robert saw an opportunity to manipulate an impressionable young man, someone willing to do anything for money? Did he push Thane into acting on his behalf to eliminate Jeff Ryan, someone Robert had long held a grudge against? The complex web of relationships and secrets pointed to more than just a single culprit, suggesting that the true story might be much deeper than it appeared. The investigation into this tragedy revealed many layers, from the brutal nature of the murders to the cover-up that followed. The questions surrounding Thane Ormsby's motivations, the extent of Robert Strout's involvement, and whether Thane truly acted alone have left a cloud of doubt and speculation. What was the real reason behind such violence, and who were the true masterminds behind the events that left the town of Amity forever changed? The answers remain elusive, sparking debate and curiosity even years after the crime. As time goes on, the impact of that day continues to ripple through the community and the families affected. The search for clarity and truth remains ongoing, but one thing is clear. In the depths of tragedy, even the smallest details can reveal the biggest truths. Well, in the end, Robert Strout, who was involved in this tragic case, ended up being sentenced to just 4 years in prison after striking a plea deal. In exchange for his testimony against Thane Ormsby, Strout was given a reduced sentence, but the true extent of his involvement and his thoughts on the events remain a mystery. Robert passed away in December 2015, and details surrounding his death remain scarce, with no significant obituary available. His wife, Joy, passed away in 2013, and not much is known about her either. Another significant part of this case is the speculation surrounding Thane Ormsby's motives. Some believe that Ormsby was involved in a relationship with Mariah, the 16-year-old daughter of Jeffrey Ryan and Tamara Stout. This relationship, which had been forbidden by Jeff Ryan, is thought to have sparked Ormsby's violent actions. On that day, Ryan's 10-year-old son Jesse was visiting for Father's Day, and family friend Jason DeHaan was also there, driving by and stopping in. No one could have predicted that these innocent lives would be caught in such a deadly situation. There are 3 main theories about why the triple homicide occurred. One is that Ormsby might have come to believe that Jeffrey Ryan was a drug dealer, possibly fueled by delusions or mental health issues. Another theory suggests that Ormsby, driven by an unexplainable urge, invented this drug dealer story as a reason to commit murder. The third theory is that Robert Strout played a part in influencing Ormsby, pushing him toward violence, suggesting he may not have acted alone. Ormsby was put on trial in 2012 and pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. The jury didn't believe his defense, and he was found guilty on all counts, including 3 life sentences for murder and a conviction for arson for burning Jeff Ryan's truck. During his sentencing, Ormsby, dressed in a pinstripe suit, showed no remorse. He wiped tears away as his mother spoke of his difficult childhood, marked by neglect and abuse. Ormsby remained emotionless. Since then, he has tried to appeal his convictions 3 times, but all attempts failed. Now, Ormsby is likely to spend the rest of his life behind bars. Despite the conviction, the case leaves a lingering sense of unresolved questions. The violent act still feels more complex than just a 20-year-old drifter who suddenly decided to kill 3 people. Ormsby was a lost soul, roaming through Maine, and it's hard to imagine what pushed him to commit such brutality. Now, how do you feel about the way justice was served in this tragic story? Share your thoughts and theories in the comments below, and do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more.